Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto sealed away in RWBY. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Sable Knight and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Being sealed wasn't really that bad honestly. He was starting to think Kurama was just a big whiny baby. It's not like he even knew whether or not any time had passed. Most of the time, he just slept. At least until a little silver-eyed girl picked him up. Now he just pitied Remnant. It wasn't ready for his particular brand of chaos. Song list. Clear and Serene Yuki Hayashi. Odd Mode Sons of Amon. RWBY liked to think she was a practical person. Sure Yang, Weiss and Blake would disagree. Sure, she knew she could be a little flighty, yes, she enjoyed tinkering with weapons a bit too much, and yes, she had a rather debilitating addiction to sugar, but that didn't stop her from being a practical person, right? Anyway, she was rambling. She had just watched Purah cut Penny into several pieces a while ago, a horde of Grims were in Vale, and running around the place willy-nilly, the Atlas mechs had gone nuts and started shooting at them, and her teammates were nowhere to be seen. So, excuse her for being in a bit of a shock at the moment alright. They had been doing okay, somewhat okay, but the moment her silver eyes had caught sight of the stupidly huge dragon, exploding right out of that goddamned mountain in the distance before it pondering through the skies towards Beacon Academy with heavy wing flaps while it rained goddamned Grims from its butt, she knew that things had hit rock bottom. The feeling alone coming from that. No number of teams could save Beacon from that. Not even Atlas's presence would help against that. So, she did the only thing she knew could help. She grabbed the rusty little bronze ring hanging around her neck. The world visibly slowed to a stop and then it shattered like glass. Reality seemed to shift sideways and she found herself standing in a meadow all of a sudden, no longer in a city. In front of her, there was a small, quaint and homely looking cottage. She saw none of that and immediately rushed through the door. She sprinted down hallways and around corners that were way too long for a small cottage to contain before she came to the last door at the end of said hallway and burst straight through them, straight into a pair of arms and a broad chest covered in a dark vest. She clung onto them like it was a lifeline and heaved a sob into said dark vest. RWBY? A rough and clearly surprised voice croaked even as the arms closed around her and one arm wrapped around her side to keep her steady even as the other began to automatically pat her back soothingly. What are you doing here? Weren't you in a tournament? Something happened, everything's a blur, the girl babbled in a muffled tone, there's Grim everywhere. And a dragon. One blonde eyebrow quirked upwards, a dragon. The eyebrow's owner replied skeptically, really? The friggin' big one. RWBY nodded her head violently, still not deigning to lift her face from his chest. It's making even more grim, and all the mechs went nuts and started shooting at us, and General Ironwood's plane went down and. She sobbed again, yo, you have to help. People are dying. The arm around her sides lifted to scratch at long spiky yellow locks of hair, there was some resignation in the man's tone, if I do that, you know what will happen. The man gently pushed her back a little. She heard cloth rustling as the man knelt down in front of her and watery eyes of mercury met glowing sapphire ones. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? Mercurial eyes looked away, she hesitated, but for a moment before her resolve solidified and she looked back, please save everyone. The man's cheeks, with whisker-like scars across them, stretched with a gentle smile, as you wish. Reality shattered once more. Back in the real world, blackish red locks burned yellow and lengthened until they were waist length and a crystalline blue hue bled through silver. Those blue eyes with slitted pupils looked around. They were standing on the wings of a plane. Wind whistled furiously around him, but it didn't affect them. In fact, the wind seemed to flow around her now, as if it was being guided by a gentle hand. Below them well, RWBY had been right. If anything, she had been understating it. The situation did not look good. Well, time for more desperate measures. Play clear and serene Yuki Hayashi. So, she inhaled, longer and deeper than anyone of her size should have any right to, and then she roared, long and loud. Everything that had been moving, stopped doing so. Every single Grim in the vicinity instantly died. Crows, griffins and whatever have you plummeted as they dissolved into ashes. Those below them were more fortunate, but Grim and humans still locked up in wide-eyed fear. All fighting within several kilometers of Beacon stopped. The air itself seemed to freeze in anticipation. Even the dragon flinched, ancient and bestial instincts warred against its desire and instructions. There was something up there. And it was not happy. Back on the plane, Roman and Neo who had been sneaking up on RWBY stumbled backwards in horror, their limbs shaking violently, you're not little red. The dark-haired girl was now blonde, her silver eyes were now crystal blue. The short blonde waif smiled politely at them, seemingly completely unsurprised, indeed, I am not, her head tilted to the side as if she was listening to something, she can hear you though. She was cheering too and making a goddamned racket as her mentor had straight up frozen everything around them with a single roar. The blonde girl in the black goth skirt calmly swept over to them and knelt next to Roman. "RWBY says that you should be the one messing with the Atlas mechs." Blue eyes bore into green, "Is she correct?" The two thieves just shook. That roar had been one thing, but her presence. I am shriveled balls, her presence. She was just kneeling there, not making any aggressive motions whatsoever, but he could feel the atmosphere itself pressing down on him. It enclosed him and choked him. He couldn't breathe. He could feel it pouring down his spine, he could see his life ending before his very eyes. Every time he shivered, he died and came back to life. The thought of lying didn't even have the chance to form in his head. Screw Cinder. Screw that fucking flame bitch. Screw her with a goddamn 10-foot barbed pole. She was messing around with things that she didn't fucking understand. That was the only thing that could explain why he was now face to face with whatever this monster was. It sure as hell wasn't human, because if it was, he'd break Melodic Cudgel into 1,000 pieces and eat them all, piece by piece. He was just a goddamn thief from the streets, but it didn't take a genius to know that whatever this blonde was, it was entire fucking magnitudes above his pay grade. Cinder was scary, but she had nothing on the blonde next to him. "Hello, is anyone home?" The blonde politely repeated again, waving one hand in front of his face. His teeth were rattling so hard he couldn't answer. So he just nodded as violently as he could to get his meaning across. The blonde waif smiled gently, almost elegantly. The smile looked extremely strange on Little Red's face, and rather than reassure him, it just made him feel like he was about to be eaten whole. Somewhere deep inside him, he wondered if being eaten by a Grimm would have been better than this. "I'm not very good with technology. Would you help me fix that instead?" Another violent nod. "That's wonderful." The monster smiled again, and one finger tapped his forehead almost playfully before doing the same to Neo. Chills run down and up his spine at the contact, even as the skin where the finger had made contact prickled painfully. What was that?" Roman half croaked. Half sobbed. "Just a bit of insurance, you understand." The blonde waif explained nonchalantly, "Hurry along and fix the mechs now please, while I deal with everything else below. Don't worry, I'll find you after I'm done." She stood up and lifted one hand. Her scythe instantly zoomed back into her hand like it had been vacuumed there before she nonchalantly stepped onto the edge of the plane's wings and jumped right off without a care. The moment that thing had jumped off the plane, the presence immediately lifted enough that Roman's limbs stopped shaking so violently. It took a minute before he could even stand. Then it took another minute for him to look at his partner. Roman's eyes met Neo's. "We fucked up," he concluded somberly. Neo nodded emphatically. They didn't even think of running away. The chills that had been running up and down his spine earlier had solidified into claws. He didn't know how he could feel it, but feel it he could. They were hooked into his very being, and there was one resting casually against his collarbone. Judging by the gray sheen on her face, he would bet 1,000 lien that Neo was currently feeling the same thing. Roman was a thief. Roman wasn't an idiot. He recognized it for what it was. It was less than a threat and more than a promise. So, he set about fixing the mechs. When she touched down on the ground, it was almost daintily and blue eyes swept around the clearing. Her smile widened at the huge amount of frozen Grimm and human alike watching her warily, and her presence ramped up spectacularly. The humans watched in wide-eyed fear as the blonde in the goth dress sashayed down the road as entire waves of Grimm outright exploded into dust with every step she took, straight towards Beacon Tower. They were affected as well. Their knees gave out and limbs shook, but they didn't die. Though at least one of them would need therapy after this. Lots and lots of therapy. As the girl with flowing blonde locks reached an intersection of the city, she tilted her head. Rather than head straight for Beacon Academy, she turned and headed down a side lane for a while until she came across 3 wide-eyed people sprawled on their backsides amidst a pile of mech parts. That was good. He had been mildly worried about those. His presence could lock down both humans and Grimm, but not mechs. Circuits did not understand fear after all. He had tried to moderate things to influence the humans as little as possible, but he couldn't stop it entirely, so they would have been slowed and weakened at the very least while handling the bots. "Good evening." She bowed politely, "It's good to finally meet the 3 of you. I've heard much about all of you from RWBY." Linda Goodwitch, Crow Branwyn and James Ironwood stared incredulously at the blonde who had nonchalantly walked out of a side alley. None of them needed to share a single word. They didn't know how, but they knew that this person in front of them had been the source of the terrifying roar and subsequently, the crushing pressure that had settled upon the city. Linda knew her students well, the troublemakers especially so. The dress, the side, the face, she recognized, was pure Ruby Rose. The mannerisms, the hair and the eyes on the other hand frankly she didn't want to know, but she had to ask. "RWBY?" She whispered weakly. "Ruby Rose. Is that you?" Not quite. The short blonde girl smiled and sketched a man's bow before answering in a painfully polite and formal tone that none of them had ever heard Ruby take before, but she's listening and she says that she's glad the three of you are okay. Especially after she saw your plane go down, Mr. Ironwood. James Ironwood blinked and nodded slowly. His tongue felt like lead and for the first time in his life, metal was completely silent and he understood why. Against this girl, no amount of resolve would be sufficient. In the face of something that was so completely beyond logic, so completely alien, that it was a variable that could not be removed, reduced or managed in any way, metal had suffered a critical error and directly crashed. Luckily, someone else had enough presence of mind to struggle to their feet and step forward aggressively, despite whatever it was that was emanating from the blonde waif. Who are you and what have you done to my niece? The blonde waif tilted her head again, as if listening to something, before she spoke. Ruby says not to worry, Mr. Branwen. Everything will be alright. But she would appreciate it if you could find her after all this is done. She would like to speak to you. Crow tried to take another step before his legs gave out again. You. Stop whatever you're doing to us. It is unfortunate, but I cannot. The blonde replied apologetically, I am the only thing preventing the Grimm from moving at the moment. If I stop, the battle will continue and more Grimm will arrive. So, until I find the culprit and deal with them, the city will have to suffer my presence. I assure you that I mean no harm to anyone in Beacon. What are you? The blonde girl simply sketched another bow, satisfied that the three of them were alright, before turning around and heading back towards Beacon Academy. What in the fresh hell was that? Ironwood breathed out finally after the presence around them had dissipated. His head was still mercifully silent. I don't know, but I plan to find out. Crow answered grimly, even as he continued to struggle to his feet. Ruby and her mentor passed a number of other students as they continued down the main road. Some he recognized, like the bunny girl and Ruby's white-haired teammate, but this time, Ruby didn't ask him to stop. As long as they were alive and visibly unwounded, she was content to let her mentor continue their journey to Beacon Academy. The mechs they had been fighting were no longer operational, so clearly Roman and Neo had done their job. Probably. Still, she hadn't seen Blake and Yang yet. So, she could only hope they were okay. Her only consolation was that her mentor had assured her that they were fine through whatever means he was using to survey the city. They were hurt but alive and in no imminent danger. She wished that they could go faster, but she knew that her mentor was already pushing it with her body. Keeping the presence up was already taking much of his focus, so he could not afford to rush. At least, not until they had reached the tower. That's when her mentor seemed to notice something happening at the top of the tower. Without a word, he dropped his presence and leapt up. His feet miraculously stuck to the surface of the tower and he began to scale it, one huge leap at a time. Purah regretted many things. But she would never regret coming up here to battle Cinder. Even as her life seemed to be coming to an end, even if she and John would no longer amount to anything together, she didn't regret because coming up here had been the right thing to do. Not the smart thing, no, but the right thing. No matter how she dodged or moved, no matter how she attacked and feinted over the new full maiden superior firepower, Cinder was faster and stronger. They had been more or less even, or so Purah liked to think, until Cinder had pulled that reforming arrow trick out of nowhere. Idly and half-blind through the pain emanating from her heel as she struggled to get back on her feet, a little voice at the back of her head wondered if that was a fall maiden ability or one of Cinder's own original ones. She certainly hadn't done it before, though that was only normal if she had only been pretending to be a student. A hand yanked her chin up and Purah had to narrow her eyes to focus blearily on her opponent. It's unfortunate you were promised a power that was never truly yours. But take comfort in knowing that I will use it in ways that you could never have imagined. Cinder gloated. Do you believe in destiny? Purah croaked back. There was a brief pause at the non-sequitur before Cinder stood back up and replied curtly, yes. Her bow reformed around her left arm. She pulled back another arrow and let it fly. At this distance, she had no hope of dodging. She refused to close her eyes and forced her eyes to stay open, if a little pointlessly. She was already too exhausted to even track the arrow, much less dodge it, so she just waited for the bolt to strike home. Her last bit of rebellion, if you would. One beat later, she felt nothing. 2 beats later, still nothing. On the 3rd beat, she finally realized that she was looking at something. That something was the tip of an arrow. Then she noticed the fist around the shaft. She blankly followed the fist up the arm. The sunshine yellow hair looked like Yang, she idly observed. But the dress was all ruby. In fact, wasn't Ruby the only one in the academy that dressed like that? It's a good thing then, that I don't. Cinder flew back from the force of a sudden wall of air smacked straight into her as a blonde that hadn't been there before appeared between the two women and crashed into one of the few remaining walls. In fact, I generally make it a point to tell Destiny to fuck off as often as I can. The fist clenched and the arrow shattered. Play God mode Sons of Amon. The unknown blonde bowed politely, good evening Cinderfall. It's nice to finally meet you. Cinder slowly floated back up again and narrowed her eyes at the intruder in partial recognition. Ruby rose. The blonde smiled politely, not quite. But please feel free to keep calling me that. One flick of the wrist sent Purah jostling over a safe corner with a quiet yelp, while his other hand gently redirected Cinder's blow to the side with one finger and promptly jabbing the dark-haired woman in the abdomen. Cinder choked violently and fell back, wah. The unknown blonde continued to stand there with a nonchalantly calm expression, one hand behind her back, the other hanging at her side, scythe neatly folded and harmlessly attached to her back, as if she had no intention whatsoever of using it. Cinder growled, no, 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 no more interruptions. Flame erupted from both hands, sending her hurtling through the air at the blonde. One finger came up again and gently pushed the kick to the side. She pivoted and the finger turned into a grip around Cinder's heel, upon which the dark-haired woman was promptly swung straight into the ground face first by her own momentum. In a cottage somewhere, Ruby cheered. The moment her mentor had gotten his hands on Cinder, he had basically already won. Ask her. She had a ton of experience with what was happening to Cinder. It almost felt cathartic to finally see it happen to someone else. The best part? It couldn't have happened to a nicer person. Her mentor didn't bother to ask questions or even try to reason with Cinder. You're right bundle of anger and angst, aren't you? The blonde observed blandly, I can feel it pouring right of you. Cinder lifted her face with a near animalistic growl as she began firing kicks from her free leg, each kick sending out gouts of flame that the blonde simply evaded with a tilt of the neck before yanking on her trapped foot again. Desperation and fear too. What of, I wonder? Purah watched blankly, half dazed, half amused as the familiar-looking blonde began swinging the ravenet around by the foot like a meat club and began to pound on anything he could reach with her face. Each hit was so hard and powerful that Purah could feel the floor shaking. She idly wondered if the blonde was planning on demolishing the entire tower with just Cinder's face alone. Then realization hit. Was that Ruby? Red light flickered with each slam as Cinder's aura held, but each flicker was coming out weaker and weaker. Cinder went half-mad trying to blast the man with her fall maiden powers, but she couldn't even aim as the world spun around wildly, much less actually hit him. Fire, ice, lightning and earth alike shot off Orion pointlessly. She yowled and struggled. She kicked and squirmed, but the grip on her ankle was like a steel clamp that she just couldn't break. Not even heating her foot up to the maximum of her abilities seemed to do anything to the blonde's hands. As her aura started to falter, she was now desperate enough to start sawing her own leg off with her semblance. Purah was just about to say something and warn the blonde about what Cinder was trying to do when a green-haired woman and a gray-haired man suddenly appeared out of nowhere behind Ruby. Greenie was already swinging those dual sides and Grey Boy kicked the air, firing off a blast from his boots. She opened her mouth, but nothing but a weak whisper came out of her abused throat. Then she watched in shock and fascination as the blonde casually intercepted the bullets without even looking. By swinging Cinder around. Straight into the shotgun pellets. Face first. And then, just to add insult to injury, he spun the other way around and slapped Emerald straight out of the air with a spinning kick. The kick sent Emerald flying straight at the gray-haired boy. Both of them hit a wall and crumpled to the ground with a groan when the blonde threw Cinder at them with a casual flick of the wrist, sending all three crashing down in a tangle of bodies and limbs. Illusions. Real cute. The person that looked like a blonde Ruby, or was that a mini Yang? Commented dryly as she shattered a huge column of marble with another kick and then sent it hurtling straight at the three attackers with a dainty push of the toe. The massive marble pillar slammed straight into Cinder's back with all the force of a dump truck. There was an audible crack. Then Purah heard a howl of pain and anguish coming from the dark-haired girl before it cut off as Cinder fainted. Something had just broke and it wasn't the pillar. The other two were still conscious but pinned beneath both Cinder and the heavy marble pillar. The blonde idly observed the three of them for a while until he was satisfied that they weren't going anywhere anytime soon, at which point he turned to Purah and smiled at her, I'm sorry about earlier, miss. Purah Nikos. As I was going to say before I was so rudely interrupted, it is nice to finally meet you face to face. There was a sudden screech as the wyvern they had forgotten about began swooping down towards them, although I wish it were under better circumstances. She nonchalantly bowed to Purah, as if the wyvern bearing down on them wasn't a huge concern at all, please give me a moment to deal with the pest. Purah blinked and nodded uncertainly as the blonde turned around and squinted up at the wyvern, well, this isn't going to be pleasant, Ruby. I hope you're ready for it. She murmured to herself. She opened one palm and a small black bead began coalescing above her palm. Due to the color, it was hard to see, but the bead was spinning hard and furious. The bead pulsed and grew until it was the size of a softball. The sheer force of the softball-sized orb's rotations was now strong enough to whip up the dust and rocks around them. He lifted it up and gently blew on the orb. Despite that gentle gesture, the orb shot off like it had been fitted with a rocket. Boom, boom, boom. Each time the orb of black light pulsed violently, it expanded dramatically until it was now large enough to rival the wyvern itself. By then, even the huge Grim knew that getting hit with something that size wouldn't be pleasant, but it was too late for it. It was too big, too ponderous to change course. And so there was nothing it could do as huge black orb slammed straight into its snout and continued hurtling up through the air without slowing down at all. The wyvern roared maniacally as it struggled and fought against whatever it was that seemed to be keeping it stuck to the ball. Everyone in the Vale that heard the roars looked up in horror as the wyvern shrieked and thrashed madly. It was almost anticlimactic, Purah observed, as the ball kept going up, and she wondered if the blonde Ruby was planning on just shoving the Grim away until it was far beyond Vale's borders or something. At least, that was what she thought, until she saw the blonde Ruby, who still had one hand aloft, clench it into a fist. Oten. Racing Kuhaku. Earth release. Spiraling void. All at once, there was a muffled burst of air, and the orb expanded until it was the inky blackness seemed to cover the entire city. It hung there like a city-sized black moon in the sky. There was no sound, no explosion, nothing. Anything it touched, be it cloud, Grim or wyvern, simply disintegrated. Complete and utter annihilation. When the black moon finally faded away, there was a perfectly round hole in the clouds above them, letting the moonlight from the real moon shine through. Finally, the blonde Ruby turned around and approached Purah with a smile. Okay, this sure as hell wasn't Ruby. Humming to herself tunelessly, the blonde ignored Purah's incredulous stare as she calmly tore off a strip of her skirt and began binding Purah's foot with a piece of wood as a makeshift splint when the elevator door suddenly creaked open. The gray-haired man stumbled through the door. Professor Osborn. Purah croaked softly. Miss Nikos. The gray-haired man cried with great relief until he set eyes on the blonde next to her, hands neatly folded on her lap now that the splint was done, looking perfectly calm and unruffled despite the destruction all around them, and Miss Rose. Mr. Osborn. The blonde smiled gently. I'm glad you made it. I was worried I had come too late. The bewildered and frazzled Osborn blinked rapidly. You are not Miss Rose. Then it finally clicked. You were the source of that roar, weren't you? Indeed I am. The blonde nodded. Thank you for that, Osborn said slowly. His eyes slowly panned around the room until they landed on Cinder and her goons. His eyebrows shot all the way up to his hairline. It scared Cinder enough that she decided to rush off and finish whatever objective she had, rather than stay and finish me off. I've dealt with the wyvern as well. The blonde added, almost smugly. You dealt with the wyvern? Osborn choked and stumbled a step mid-sentence and stared at the short blonde waif. Who are you? The short blonde smiled gently. No one important. Then she patted Purah's good knee. By the way, Miss Nikos. Purah blinked in a nonplussed manner. Yes. Please catch me. Excuse me. The blonde gave her and Osborn a cheeky little wave before blue eyes rolled up into her head and she collapsed onto said knee face first. Osborn and Purah stared in complete and utter disbelief as the blonde fainted just like that. Then the blonde wasn't even a blonde anymore as her hair sunk back into her skull until it reached Ruby's customary neck-length cut and turned back into their usual blackish red. Fuck this. I need some coffee. Osborn muttered. Purah mutely nodded in agreement. Being sealed wasn't really that bad, honestly. He was starting to think Kurama was just a big whiny baby. It's not like he even knew whether or not any time had passed. Most of the time, he just slept. At least until a little silver-eyed girl picked him up. Now he just pitied Remnant. It wasn't ready for his particular brand of chaos. Silver eyes cracked open blearily. She sort of stared blankly at the ceiling for a bit. She still remembered everything with crystal clear clarity. It wasn't like her memory was fuzzy or foggy or anything. Last thing she remembered was that big-ass wyvern had been repelled, if you could call being straight up disintegrated, repelled. There were still Grim in the city, but with Atlas's mechs back online, those weren't an issue with how many hunters there were in the city. At most it was just the White Fang. She hoped Blake was fine. This actually wasn't so bad. She knew her mentor had just been exaggerating. It was a bit surreal on a Pethrit was. Ruby trembled minutely and screwed her eyes shut, even as a few beads of tears leaked out from the all-consuming pain. Someone must have been in the room with her, because she could hear someone immediately shouting for the doctor through the haze of pain. In short order, her room was already filled with people in white robes, rushing around and messing around with that fluid bag thingy hanging above her head. After that, it didn't take long before the pain finally subsided, but that just left her feeling weary and tired down to the bone. Ruby? Ruby, are you okay? The doctors left, and she could hazily see a cloud of yellow hair. Flitting about in front of her, Ruby smiled somewhat dreamily. Yang. You're alright. Yeah, I'm alright. There was something forced about Yang's tone, but in her haze, Ruby did not notice at all. Is everyone else okay? She managed to slur out. They're fine, Ruby, you did good. You saved everyone. Jaehae Yang rolled her eyes at the dark-haired girl's manic little giggle. Typical Ruby. Go back to sleep, Ruby, we'll talk once you're up. MMMHMM. Everything sort of faded away into a wash of color and whiteness again. The next thing she knew, she was looking at a familiar white ceiling. Right. Hospital. Ruby's dark silver eyes blinked numbly before she tried to look around and stopped short when she realized that she wasn't alone in the room. Her room was packed. Miss Glinda was there. Crow was there, simmering not so lightly. And so were her friends. Well, most of her friends, Ruby mentally amended. She couldn't see why Sir Blake anywhere. Hera was there though, along with her team, though they looked rather nervous with Osmond, Glinda and Crow being in the same room as them. The sweet girl sent her a small wave and a warm smile though. Anyway, why? At the questioning look, Professor Osmond finally coughed into one hand and stood forward. You're awake, Miss Rose. Do you feel better? Ruby slowly nodded. Why was he acting like she had died or something? At the strange look he was getting from the dark-haired waif, Osmond elaborated as gently as he could, you've been unconscious for 2 weeks, Miss Rose. That didn't sound too bad. She had been expecting worse, honestly. The last time she had done something like this, she had been out for months. She had been 5 then if she remembered correctly. Behind him, Yang snorted like an angry yellow bull. He didn't mention that your heart stopped at least twice. And your entire goddamn skeleton was cracked when the doctors got to you. Ruby's little mouth formed a tiny O of surprise. Everyone in the room shifted uncomfortably. Don't give me that look. Yang screeched before Osmond could stop her. What the hell was that? Miss Xiaolong, please. Osmond interjected with a stern look. That was enough to finally settle Yang back down, but Ruby refused to feel any shame. She knew it had been necessary. Hell, she distinctly remembered Professor Osmond saying that sensei had saved his life too. The pugnaciously set jaw told Yang as much and her big sis harumphed angrily. That movement caused Ruby to notice something else. Namely, Yang's right arm. Or rather, what was left of Yang's right arm. Silver eyes went wide and she stared at her older sister disbelievingly. Her chin wobbled and she weakly lifted up her hands. Yang's shoulder slumped at that and she shuffled forwards to pull her baby sister into a hug with her one good arm. The two sisters hugged tightly until Yang relented with a whisper, you did good, Ruby. You saved everyone. Even me. After Yang had let go and Ruby had had a drink of water to soothe her throat, Ruby finally felt okay enough to talk. Why is everyone here? The looks she was getting at that question were clearly asking if she was dumb. Yang just facepalmed. Okay. Fine. Stupid question. Is Beacon okay? She croaked out her next question. It's damaged. We lost many people and we will have to rebuild. But Beacon, and indeed Vale itself, are still standing, thanks to you. Ruby nodded slowly. At least her main objective had been achieved. Where's Weiss and Blake? She croaked out again. The crowd in her room shifted again and Ruby quirked one brow at them. Miss Schnee has been asked to return to Atlas. Osmond finally answered and we have been unable to find Miss Belladonna. She has left Vale as far as we can tell. Ruby's other brow joined the first one. What the hell had been going on while she was out? She was snapped back to reality when Professor Osmond tapped her shoulder gently. Miss Rose, before we continue, would you mind if we asked about that other Rose? Other Rose? What other Rose? Oh. Ooh, they thought. Ruby couldn't help it. She began to giggle at the thought of her mentor dressed in her clothes. Everyone else just looked at the giggling girl as if she had gone crazy. Ruby. Yang rolled her eyes again and snapped her fingers repeatedly. Focus. Kickus Rose. Not Dorky Rose. Details. Now. Hey, Rose silently protested, she was Kickus too alright. Sensei just kicked more ass than her. So, she reached for her neck and abruptly paled when her fingers touched her bare neck. The ring. It was gone. My ring. Ruby croaked to everyone's confusion. Everyone in the room looked around in bewilderment until Osmond again stood out. Would I be correct in assuming that that ring had something to do with the other Rose? Ruby nodded frantically as she dug around her bed in case it had slipped off somewhere. Found it. Purah said triumphantly, holding up the little bronze thing that was hanging onto the leather cord, it was under your bed. The Redeed explained as she placed it in Ruby's grateful hands. Ruby heaved a sigh of relief as she carefully placed it back around her neck. Immediately, she called into the void. Sensei. The response came back almost instantly, sup. Ruby rolled her eyes. The great big jerk was obviously fine. He wasn't the one who had gotten laid out on a hospital for 2 weeks and got a great big cracked skeleton to go with it. I did warn you. So? Explanations. Yang tapped her foot impatiently as Ruby spaced out. Again. You remember that old video game from Mistral? Ruby began hesitantly, the ones where the protagonist found a crystal that had a spirit grandpa or grandma inside. And the spirit taught them everything and gave them powers like health regen and super forms, and so on. Neverending Fantasy 3. Yang doubtfully quirked one eyebrow at her sister. Yeah, that one. The ring is kinda like that. She touched the ring fondly, I found this when I was 4. Ruby continued hoarsely, at Mom's grave. I was just talking to her, you know. She shrugged awkwardly at the sad look she was getting, I saw this glinting in the grass and thought it was hers. So, I picked it up and kept it. Sensei told me later on he didn't know Mom though. Sensei? Osborne echoed the unfamiliar word. It sounded vaguely Mistralian or Managerian. Means mentor in Sensei's language. Ruby explained simply. Are you seriously telling me there's an old dude in that ring that talks to you? Yang blurted out incredulously, that gives you a super form. That's what the other rose is. Complete with heavy drawbacks after you fall out of it. You're shitting me, right? Miss Yang. Language. Glinda shot in sternly. Not quite. Ruby hedged, I don't get anything myself. No health buffs, no super big aura, no super form, nothing. He doesn't really teach me anything either because he doesn't know how to use a scythe. He doesn't know how to use any weapon really. At most we just spar or talk when he's not in the mood for a fight. I can let him use my body for a bit though, that's what that was. I wish it looked cooler though. Ruby rambled on, unaware of the look she was starting to get again, I mean, in those games, they always turned the hair something flashy like pure white. Mine just turns yellow. It's so boring. Oh You spar with him? Purr interjected, ignoring Yang's explosion. Yep. Ruby nodded happily, unaware of the look she was currently getting. How? It's hard to explain. I don't just talk to him. When I touch the ring and sort of wish it, the world sort of slows to a stop. Then I sort of mentally go into the ring to see him. My body's still here. Ruby replied a little shyly. Osborne immediately paled and shared a heavy look with Crow. That sounded familiar. The 5th relic. One they didn't know about. That didn't sound good. What was this one called? The Ring of Power. And it was just swinging around the world without a goddamn vaulter maiden to protect it. The best part was, it appeared that this one had been safer than all the others purely because no one had even known about it. Not even the goddamned relic of knowledge. I'm going to need everyone to stop asking Miss Rose any more questions. Osborne immediately started lockdown procedures, he already regretted asking questions in front of these many people, but how was he supposed to have known? Why? Yang interrupted. I'm afraid Miss Rose may be in great danger. Osborne temporized, this kind of power may draw the wrong sort of attention to her. Bit late for that. Crow observed bitterly, already guessing what Osborne was trying to do and what he was planning to do, she's been all over the news for the past 2 weeks. You take that thing away from her and she won't even have a backup option, drawbacks be damned. And we've already learned that Beacon is not infallible. Sensei says you don't have to worry about that. Ruby timidly interrupted, it doesn't matter if you take the ring. It'll just come back to me. Crow's mouth felt like it was filled with sawdust, and if someone kills you for it. Ruby paled, what? Osborne looked around the room and sighed heavily, there are many people who want that kind of power, Miss Rose. None of them good. He bowed apologetically, please get some rest. It seems like you will have a busy schedule ahead of you. He said some other things too, but Ruby was now too dazed to hear anything. At night, as she laid on her bed, blankly staring at the ceiling with unseeing eyes, replaying that earlier debacle over and over again in her head. Eventually, she placed her hand on the ring hesitantly. The world visibly slowed to a stop and then it shattered like glass. Reality seemed to shift sideways and she found herself standing in a meadow all of a sudden, no longer in her bed at the hospital. In here, she was completely hale and healthy. There was no soreness whatsoever. She stared at the door in front of her and hesitated. You might as well come in. A voice called her out. Ruby smiled pitifully before she pushed the door of the Mistralian or Managerian-styled cottage open. Ruby didn't really know what style the cottage was supposed to be, she was just parroting Professor Osborne. Inside, there was a cozy living room with a small fire burning merrily in the hearth. A rugged blonde man who looked to be in his mid-20s was sitting on the floor in a corner. The book in his hand and the Mistralian atmosphere of the home completely failed to match with the man's Valiant-style trousers, white shirt and black vest. As she was staring at him uncertainly, the blonde peered back at her over a pair of glasses, well. So that was a thing. Ruby finally replied awkwardly as she took her customary seat next to him. MMMHMM. Like I said, I did warn you. The blonde repeated his earlier statement with a more informal tone than the one he had used with everyone else and casually flipped to the next page. When? Ruby protested indignantly, you just asked me if I was willing to make a sacrifice. I thought you were just talking about being stuck in the hospital. You didn't say anything about maniacs chasing after me. He glanced at her, it was included in the fine print. Right under sacrifice and next to common sense, the man noted dryly. The girl made a keening sound and rolled around the room in a childish tantrum, prompting the older man to roll his eyes and turn to another page uncaringly. She eventually ended up rolling until her head was comfortably wedged on the man's lap and she pouted up at him as adorably as she could. Her mentor ignored her. She pouted harder. Her mentor flipped to another page. She cranked it up to 11. He lasted for about a minute under her onslaught. Then he folded like a house of wet cards. Alright. Stop looking at me like that. The blonde man finally put down the book with a resigned sigh, you're so lucky I'm one of the good guys. If it was someone else sealed in here, like giant grumpy foxes, you'd probably be having a real bad time right about now. Don't know any foxes. Lucky you. RWBY happily bounced up and hugged the blonde's midsection, I knew you'd help. Not so fast. The blonde warned her, this isn't going to be easy. RWBY just hummed happily, despite his words, the blonde was still patting her back gently. Alright. What are we going to do? Not we. You. I'm stuck in here, remember? RWBY nodded excitedly, okay, what do I need to do? First, we'll need to get out of Beacon and go on a journey. The blonde said sagely, you will need to seek out 8 other rings just like this one scattered around the world. Each contains a part of my power. You will have to find them all and unlock my true power before I can pass it on to you. You're shitting me, right? 8 other rings. All over the world. Language? The whiskered blonde smirked, also, yes. I was shitting with you. SENSCEIII RWBY whined in a spoiled manner. I'm serious about the journey though. What? Why? Tradition I suppose. Her mentor replied with a shrug. The dark-haired girl stared at him like he was insane, what tradition? Tradition for people who have dangerous beings of power stuck in them. The whiskered blonde commented dryly. RWBY perked up as she suddenly saw a loophole, wait, so if it's just tradition, I don't actually have to go on a journey, right? One rough and calloused hand tousled her hair, be serious for a minute, kid. I'm not joking about that trip. He lifted up one finger, your first problem, like your uncle said, is the fact that you probably already have a target on your back if what he said about our little adventure being recorded and put online was true. Even if they don't know about the ring, chances are, they still want to know how you did what I did because my race in Kuhaku sure as hell ain't no semblance and I haven't even pulled out the big guns yet. No to mention, those that do find out about the ring will know they need to go through you first. The second finger rose, your second problem. This attack on Beacon wasn't an accident. Someone arranged everything to happen at the same time. In other words, you and I just screwed up someone's plans. Someone who's more than likely going to be gunning for you as revenge, ring or no ring. And this time, they'll pull out all the stops because they already think you're powerful. Another finger lifted, your third problem. They already know where you are. You stay in Beacon and someone will eventually come along, most likely the guy from problem number 2, and try something stupid. Best case scenario, you get hurt. Worst case scenario, other people get hurt trying to protect you, and you die anyway. The next finger went up, your fourth problem is the fact that Beacon's walls can't block a damned fly, much less an assassin, for the foreseeable future, so they're just gonna keep on coming. Plus, Osmond's a piece of shit. What? RWBY, who had been listening intently, squawked at that last line, why? Weren't you just getting along fine with him? I don't like liars. Her mentor replied simply, and he started lying out of his ass every other sentence the moment you told him about me. He was lying so hard I was wondering if his pants would spontaneously combust or something. Granted, he might have a reason for that, and he did point out the most important thing, but he's hiding a lot of other things that may or may not be related to points 1 to 3, so, until I find out what that they are, I'm not gonna trust him with someone as squishy as you. He fondly poked her squishy stomach just to make a point. The girl who he had watched grow from a tiny little thing no taller than his knee until she was about chest height growled angrily at him in return. It was adorable. So he booped her nose. Stop that. She batted his finger away before slumping back down into her seat and curling up sadly and hugging her knees to her chest, so I really have to leave all my friends all over again. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, kid. Sake. RWBY murmured and quietly wiped away a tear, when do I need to go? The blonde sighed and pulled the small ball of a girl to his side, there's no deadline, I guess. But I'm not the one in danger here. I can't make your decisions for you. All I can do is tell you what's what. One silver eye peeked up at him and she nuzzled his side, I don't regret doing it, you know. I know. He nodded solemnly. The two of them sat together in companionable silence. Incidentally. There's nothing that says you can't bring a few friends along. A small group is even easier to hide than one lone traveler. 4 or 5 sounds perfect. Also, I'm just about done modifying your core. Took me about a decade to scratch it out bit by bit so you didn't go mad from pain since you weren't born with one and boy wasn't that a huge pain in the ass. I was even planning on making it a big surprise gift for your first year at Beacon, but NOOO you had to join early. Anyway, that super big aura and buffs and so on. Yeah. Bit of training and we should be good to go. Super form still a bit iffy though, not sure how I'm gonna pull that one off, but we'll see. Plus. We can fix your sister's arm before we go. It'll set you back a day or two at most. No biggie. The blonde hummed to himself happily when Mount Ruby finally erupted and a small ball of black fury and rage launched herself into his stomach with a war cry, "You big jerk. You couldn't start with those first." Being sealed wasn't really that bad honestly. He was starting to think Kurama was just a big whiny baby. It's not like he even knew whether or not any time had passed. Most of the time, he just slept. At least until a little silver-eyed girl picked him up. Now he just pitied Remnant. It wasn't ready for his particular brand of chaos. Notes. For the record, I have never read or watched Boruto and I don't plan to. Therefore, what Naruto can or cannot do in the Boruto generation will probably not be mentioned in this fanfiction. Please enjoy the chapter and review. Reading your comments encourage my creative juices. RWBY greedily sucked in a breath of fresh, non-hospital air and stretched happily, reveling in the feeling of finally wearing something that wasn't a flimsy hospital gown that floated and exposed everything. It had taken a while, roughly another 2 weeks, so she had been stuck in the hospital for a total of 1 month, but the doctors had finally given her the green light to leave and a stern warning not to do anything excessive. When had she ever been excessive? She was the very picture of reason and rationality. RWBY. Silver eyes shot around to find a cloud of yellow hair floating towards her, accompanied by the familiar blackish gray of her uncle. Yang. Uncle Crow. RWBY squealed happily as she burst into a shower of pink petals before reappearing in front of her family members and embraced both of them tightly. Hey RWBY. Crow greeted with a nearly gentle smile as he patted her back, "You're finally out." RWBY then stepped back with a rare serious expression, "Do you guys have a moment? I kinda really need to talk to you about something." Over the past 2 weeks, if she wasn't sleeping, she had had a continuous stream of visitors, which had made it rather difficult for her to bring it up until now. Yang just shrugged with a self-depreciating smile, "It's not like I got anything to do at the moment with my arm like this." She completely failed to notice the brief look of triumph and gloating that appeared on RWBY's face. On the other hand, Crow just looked resigned. Beckoning his 2 nieces to follow him, the 2 of them left the hospital at a brisk pace. The hospital wasn't too far from Beacon Academy, where she knew her uncle had an apartment, so RWBY took the opportunity to energetically look around. Her energy dimmed slightly as she finally beheld the extent of the damage that had been done during the attack on Beacon, as the locals were calling it now. Entire shops and buildings had crumbled and there was a lot of construction ongoing. Near a few other buildings, she could see many firemen and a pair of ambulances outside, bustling around. "Looks bad, doesn't it?" Crow commented as he noticed what his younger niece was gaping at and he patted her back, "It could have been worse if not for you and that ring. Take pride in that." RWBY nodded sadly. She just wished all of this wouldn't have been necessary at all in the first place. "Don't worry, you'll do better next time." RWBY smiled and touched the ring hanging around her neck happily. As the trio approached the city center where the main road would lead them straight to Beacon, she saw a few screens that were still covering the attack and providing progress updates on the rebuilding. The damage here wasn't so bad, the crowd was already bustling and the streets were packed. Considering this was the economic center of Vale, chances were the damage here had already been fixed while she was still in the hospital. She even saw herself plus blonde hair on one screen, it was loudly calling for Professor Osmond to release her name and whereabouts for the people to thank. Thankfully, Yang had brought her some casual clothes to wear the day before, so the similarities between her and the picture of her in her combat gear wasn't so readily obvious anymore. Just as she was thinking that, she saw another screen playing an advertisement for new clothes that for some odd reason resembled her combat gear. Corset, skirt and all. RWBY blushed. It kinda felt nice. Just as she was daydreaming, she felt someone shout her name RWBY. All 3 of them stopped to look around until they saw a flash of red hair and an arm waving at them enthusiastically, "Purr." RWBY called back happily. The other girl was dressed in casual clothes, a homely looking blouse and a pair of jeans, and she was with John. In a cafe. "Oh. Ooh." As Purr said something to John and began to jog over to her, RWBY noticed that Nora and Lyran were nowhere to be seen. Which meant RWBY's grin widened with glee. Ho 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 RWBY laughed evilly, prompting Purr to skid to a stop and give her a wary look. "Why are you laughing like that RWBY?" "Nothing." RWBY cleared her throat, so was that a date? Purr blushed shyly. Blushed. RWBY mentally squealed, the mature girl never blushed. Not in front of her at least. Anyway, the tall redhead cleared her throat with some embarrassment and glanced at Yang's teasing grin and Crow's amused expression. Do you think I could have a moment to speak to you once you're free? No problem. RWBY chirped happily, I got something to do in Beacon with Yang and Uncle Crow right now, so I'll call you on your scroll when I'm free. Is that okay? Hera nodded gratefully with a surprisingly intense look in her eyes and waved them goodbye. This time, RWBY walked with a pep in her step. As RWBY entered the living room of Crow's teacher's apartment, she narrowed her eyes with distaste, it's even messier than normal. Crow shrugged as he closed the door behind him, Yang's been living here too. I've been camping out on the sofa instead. Her eyes shot to Yang who shrugged uncomfortably, I didn't want to stay alone in the dorm room. RWBY immediately hugged her big sis, she had forgotten that with her in the hospital and both Weiss and Blake gone, Yang would have been the only one left in Team RWBY. So, what do you want to talk about, Pipsqueak? Crow began as he led them to the small and cramped dining table. Well, here came the hard part, RWBY groused as she let go of Yang and took a seat. Tsinsiwants Metagunatrup. Yang straight up exploded, what? What trip? Crow slowly deciphered that stream of consciousness before sighing. If he was being honest, he didn't want RWBY anywhere near Beacon at the moment either. But he had to try because he felt that being near Osborne was probably the safest place for RWBY to be. So, he placed one hand on Yang's shoulder to calm her down before looking straight at a fidgeting RWBY. Did he say why he wants you to leave Beacon, RWBY? He said a lot of things, RWBY hedged. Things like. Well, the walls and the city aren't fixed yet, right? So, Grim can attack easier now, right? And there's a lot of unhappiness in the air and all. We're huntresses, RWBY. Yang countered with a frown, even if we're still in training, we're supposed to be helping protect the people until that barrier is fixed. That's not a good reason to leave right now. And for the record, I don't know about you, but I still think talking to spirits in rings isn't a good thing. Well, that wasn't all he said. He said it a lot better than I did too. RWBY protested. None of which you remember right now. Crow noted with a painfully dry tone. RWBY buried her face in her palms with an embarrassed keen and grabbed the ring before the two of them could stop her. All at once, RWBY slumped down in her seat before Yang watched disbelievingly as her little sister's hair lengthened again and shone a bright vibrant yellow before crystal blue eyes that were previously dark silver snapped open. The blonde RWBY looked around in a nonplussed manner for a while before rubbing her temples. She ran, didn't she? Crow looked down at his bottle of alcohol and wondered if it wasn't too early to get sodding drunk yet before he looked back up. Yep. Yang shot up and made to grab the blonde. What are you doing? Make her come back. You're going to hurt her again. The blonde RWBY merely caught Yang's hand and gently set it down the table. Be calm, Miss Xiaolong. You misunderstand what I'm doing. As long as I'm just sitting here like this, there will not be any harm done to RWBY's body. At the worst, she will simply feel a little tired. Yang eyed the blonde girl doubtfully. This was the first time she was actually seeing other RWBY in person. Unlike the others, she had been with Blake at the time. Of course, she had seen the video recordings, but seeing this in person. It was kind of an eye-opener. It was equally obvious even with a single glance that it wasn't her sister in that body right now. The mannerisms were completely off. Where RWBY liked to flap her hands around, this girl had her hands were primly folded on her lap. RWBY liked to jiggle her feet as if she couldn't contain herself, but this girl's legs were folded confidently. RWBY tended to slump timidly, but this RWBY's back was iron rod straight. Tired? You sure you're not draining her lifespan or something, right? Like in those video games. The blue-eyed blonde laughed at that, even her laugh was prim and proper. Yang noted, no, I'm not. Please, believe me. She was hospitalized because I was simply pushing her body to be faster and use more strength than it actually had. Not to say that she won't eventually reach that point even without my interference, but that is a while away yet. This possession, if you could call it that, is tiring, but far from dangerous, especially since it was done willingly by both parties with no ill intent. Then why haven't the two of you done it more often? Crow pointed out cynically. Other than that one time when she was a child, I've never had a reason to do it until now, nor is it something I would easily do. The blonde waif responded simply, I am content to just stay in the ring and sleep, and I still am, mind you. I only came out because RWBY requested for my help. Wait, that one time when she was a child. Yang spluttered, when was this? I think she was 5. The blonde waif replied after a thoughtful moment. You mean that time when RWBY fainted for months? The taller blonde exhaled heavily, that was because of you? It was, yes. The blue-eyed blonde didn't deny it, she was visiting her mother's grave again, alone if I might add, and was attacked by a Beowulf. The blue-eyed blonde explained resignedly, I had been asleep before that. I wasn't even aware that someone had picked up my ring until her screams woke me up. I didn't know what was happening other than the fact that the girl who had picked my ring up was being attacked by some odd black beast, so I had to forcefully take over and defend her before I walked her back home, but even that one short instance of combat affected her badly due to her age, to say nothing of the forced possession. You can see why I would prefer not to do it unless necessary. Yang and Crow shared a complicated look before sighing. Let's get back on topic. You want to take her out of Beacon, right? What are you going to do about her education? Crow challenged. Anything Beacon can't teach her, I can as well. The blonde replied calmly, and the things that Beacon can't, I can. And why do you want to take her out of Beacon? The short blonde shrugged and outlined everything he had informed RWBY 2 weeks ago, without hiding a single thing. Including everything he had noted about Osborne. Especially everything he had noted about Osborne. The significant look he was sending Crow told him that he had not missed the look Crow and Osborne had shared in that room. At this point, even Yang was watching him curiously. Crow hesitated at that. Osborne's a complicated person. He's someone I trust, and I know he only has your best interests at heart. Has he tightened security around Beacon? More patrols maybe? Has he checked all the construction workers that are coming into Vale right now? Has he checked all the supplies that are being sent to Vale? Has he been investigating how Miss Fall got into Beacon so easily? Has he investigated how Miss Fall corrupted all the Atlas mechs? The blonde rattled off, one finger tapping on her knee with a raised eyebrow. I don't know. Crow admitted. So if he can't even plug all the holes Team RWBY found before the attack on Beacon, how is he supposed to keep her safe after? Look, there's a reason why you have to stay in Beacon. Crow drew a deep and annoyed breath. The blonde didn't interrupt him, but crystal eyes glinted as Crow finally fell into his trap. There's a fairy tale that basically says that there's 4 legendary relics. Choice, knowledge, creation and destruction. Alone, they're pretty powerful, but gather them and they can do some pretty wacky things. However, to access them you need 4 maidens. He thinks you might be the 5th relic that no one knew about until now. I don't know what relics you are talking about, but he is most assuredly wrong. The blonde commented dryly, this isn't a relic. I know who put me in there, and I know it sure as hell wasn't a god. Crow's mouth fell open, you know who put you in a ring. I do. The blonde waif replied curtly with a dangerous glint in her eyes that warned Crow not to push further. Long story, and most definitely not related to your relics. She tilted her head. Miss Fall was a maiden, wasn't she? Crow looked like he had swallowed a lemon as he nodded slowly. She's the current fall maiden. The remaining ones are summer, spring and winter. The blonde contemplated that for a while in Miss Nikos. Cinder said that those powers had been promised to her. Crow just slumped back into his chair. Without a word, he pulled out the flask at his hip and drained it empty in one go. He felt dizzy, like he was being seen through and read like a book. She was supposed to be the replacement fall maiden. Normally, those powers stay with someone until they die. Crow uttered quietly, the previous one was in a coma after an attack by some unknown people that we now know was Cinder and her gang. Cinder stole half of her fall maiden powers in that attack somehow. I got there in time to save her, but she was in a coma. We kept her body safe, but Cinder got through anyway and killed her. The power immediately transferred to Cinder, since half of it was already with her. Nikos was originally there with Osborne to take the remaining half from Amber, without killing her in the process via some janky machine, but well, Cinder got there first. Then you showed up and the rest is history. Yang stared at her uncle as if this was the first time she had seen him. All these talk about fairy tales, maidens and relics, sent her head spinning. Thank you Mr. Branwen. I appreciate your honesty. The blonde waif smiled gently at his exhausted expression. You really going to take RWBY away from Beacon? Alone? Yang muttered sadly, what about me? The blonde waif quirked one eyebrow, I never said she was going alone. She was going to ask you to come with her. I believe she plans on finding Blake and Weiss too. Yang brightened up, yeah, that's right. We're Team RWBY. The blue-eyed blonde nodded before turning back to Crow, what do you think Mr. Osborne will do when we inform him of our intent to leave? I don't think Osborne will force you to stay. But he means well, he wants to ensure your safety. Please believe that at least. Both you and I know that RWBY would never stand by while people are getting hurt. She won't stand to let herself be caged like some prize bird. The short and currently blonde girl smiled gently, you also know that keeping her will simply mean that people will keep coming after H. The blonde was suddenly cut short and she looked away abruptly, well. Looks like the first attempt is already here. Someone in the city must have seen us on our way here. Crow frowned, what? The city is being attacked by Grimm. The blonde who was staring into the distance outside the window observed. What? How? No time. We need to go. Get your weapons. With a muttered curse, Crow grabbed Harbinger as Yang went to the room to retrieve Ember Celica's left gauntlet. No one said anything or stopped her, for which she was profoundly grateful. She hated it when other people commented on her right arm nowadays. Like her days as a huntress was already over. She had heard from Professor Osborne that General Ironwood was sending her a prosthetic, but she was loath to use it. It felt like admitting that there was no going back. "Are we going to the city?" Crow asked seriously. "No, it's just a diversion." The short blonde replied casually, "We're heading to the dorms." As they left Crow's apartment, the blonde waif blurred mid-step and all of a sudden there were 3 identical rubies to Yang and Crow's complete shock. The other 2 immediately veered off without a word, while the middle one kept going without even breaking a step. "What was that?" Yang blurted out, "Was that your semblance?" "Don't have a semblance." The blonde in Ruby's body replied simply, "It's a bit complicated, I'll tell you once we're done with this." When they arrived, the blonde stopped short at the entrance to the dorms. "I won't be fighting. I'd prefer if Ruby not spend another month in the hospital." "Fair enough." Crow grunted as he pushed open the door and sprinted down a corridor infested with Grim. Ruby leisurely followed behind him while Yang brought up the rear. There was screaming and sounds of fighting as the students in the dorms started fighting back. There was a distinct hint of aggression and anger in their moves. The 3 of them began to hacking and slashing their way through the mess until the blonde waif led them to Team RWBY's dorm. There, she kicked the door open and casually stepped back, evading a furious claw swipe before she had even seen it. "There. That's our target," she noted a little unnecessarily. It was huge, and it had completely thrashed the dorm room. Behind it, there was a huge hole where the windows had once been. Clearly the Grim had used them as a point of entry. It looked like a Beowulf if a Beowulf was tall enough to reach the ceiling or stand on both feet. And that was before it talked. Silver eyes, the thing groaned hungrily, blue eyes. Crow and Yang were both stopped short to stare at the talking Grim in horror. Behind them, the blonde simply rolled her crystal blue eyes and grabbed Yang's collar, yanking her back before the beast could shred her face. Crow was experienced enough that he hadn't been affected for too long. Instead, he rolled and slashed upwards before the sword transformed into scythe that he hooked onto the beast's neck in one smooth motion and pushed. The scythe swung around one full circle around the Grim's neck before the handle landed back in Crow's hand. Then he stared in disbelief as the Grim simply ignored his attacks. It chuffed as if it was chuckling even as the slash wounds he had made simply warped and then closed. Blue eyes it made to reach for Ruby before it was blocked by Crow with Harbinger in long sword form when a tower of earth suddenly shot out of the ground and pierced its shoulder. There was a brief lull as Crow blinked. Then there was a huge forest of stone spikes shooting up all over the room, forcing Crow to leap back as the Grim thrashed and roared behind the wall of earth spikes. They saw it punch a hole straight in between the cracks of the spikes where one glowing red eye appeared. It glared at the blonde Ruby who had 1 foot forward with a glowing seal beneath her shoe. Said blonde simply quirked one eyebrow in return. It watched them a bit longer, as if memorizing their faces before it turned around and they heard the sounds of the beast leaving. "What was that?" Crow muttered in disbelief as the stone spikes receded back into the ground before turning around. The blonde Ruby simply shrugged, "My point being made for me." Crow set his shoulders, "Go pack up, you two." Beneath Beacon, another blonde Ruby hummed as she strolled down a corridor until she came to a bunch of cells. In one of them was a girl she recognized as Cinder's companion. The green-haired one at least. The gray-haired one wasn't here. She briefly considered the girl who just glared back, "What do you want?" "The city's being attacked by Grim again." The blue-eyed blonde explained languidly, "I'm sure you know what that means." The girl with mint-colored hair blanched, "They're here for Cinder." "Well, I'm not quite sure who they is yet, but I reckon I'll find out eventually." The blonde replied casually, "Would you like to go and see Miss Fall?" Emerald stared at the blue-eyed girl standing behind the bars incredulously, "What? Would you like to go and see Miss Fall?" she repeated patiently. Emerald hesitated before she nodded slowly. "Why?" "Look, if you just want to fuck around, go find someone else." Emerald spat. "I'm not playing around." The unruffled blonde replied, "You seem to genuinely care for Miss Fall, even though you know she barely even thinks of you as a person. I was just curious why and if it was worth it." Emerald flinched away at the blonde's blunt assessment. "She's everything I have." The girl muttered, "I would be nothing without her." "Fair enough." Emerald looked up to see the blonde fiddled with the door for a while before it suddenly swung open, just like that. Emerald twitched, "Who are you?" "You can call me Ruby for now I suppose." The blue-eyed girl bowed slightly, "May I know your name?" "I've met Ruby." "You're most definitely not Ruby." She replied sarcastically as she stepped out of the room before shrugging, "It's not like they didn't know who she was at this point, Emerald Sustrai." "It's nice to meet you, Miss Sustrai." Blonde Ruby tilted her head before her left hand suddenly shot out and snatched at the air on his side, "That's not very nice, Miss Sustrai." Emerald wavered back into visibility, a disbelieving look on her face at the hand that had caught her left bicep while the emerald in front of the blonde evaporated. Rather than get angry, the blonde simply pulled her along by the hand. Come along. Best we get to Miss Fall before your friend finds her. Friend? Emerald's dark skin paled. Who? No idea. The blonde replied calmly, I only know that he's not a very pleasant person. The blonde hurried the two of them down another corridor until they came to the medical facility where the blonde entered without any hesitation. Miss Fall, I hope you are well. The raven-haired woman who was chained to a hospital gurney glared at him ferociously. The chains amused the blonde. Was there even a point in chaining a woman who had a broken spine? She couldn't even move her arms, much less her legs. In fact, he was pretty sure everything below her neck was useless at the moment, and Osmond was smart enough to know not to change that. The blonde Ruby just smirked even as Emerald rushed to Cinder's side. Cinder. Are you alright? The amber-eyed glare turned on Emerald, and the dark-skinned girl flinched away. I'm sorry. She choked quietly. Unseen to the two of them, the blonde Ruby made some hand signs before she placed her hands on the door. Majin. Kokoni Arazu no Jutsu. Mnemonic illusion. False surroundings technique. Satisfied, she moved next to the gurney and observed as Emerald gently and carefully helped Cinder take a sip of water, although the dark-haired woman steadfastly refused to stop glaring at her or even say a word. He's here. The blonde suddenly commented and waved one hand, causing the door to turn transparent. Emerald's breath hitched as she turned around. Together, the three of them watched a silhouette with a segmented tail arched behind his back prowl past the doors, muttering curses and swearing softly. Durian. Cinder finally growled through gritted teeth as the clearly lost man paced back and forth in confusion outside the medical facility. Why can't he see us? Emerald asked softly. I put an illusion on the door. The blonde shrugged at Emerald's wide-eyed stare. He can't see the door. He thinks it's just a wall. Then he gave Cinder a sidelong look once the man named Tyrion had given up and finally left. Your employer must be an interesting person. That man is no better than a mad dog. They're after me because of you. If you hadn't interfered, I wouldn't be in this situation. Cinder hissed angrily. Oh, was I supposed to stand back and let you commit a massacre? The blonde inquired politely. I'll remember that and stand back the next time your employer sends another assassin after you. Emerald slumped down on a stool next to the gurney and looked at the blonde waif. What do we do now? Blonde Ruby simply quirked an eyebrow. Why exactly are you asking me? The fact that she had been the one to put them in here in the first place went unsaid. The dark-skinned girl flushed. The blonde took pity on her and patted her shoulder reassuringly. Mr. Osborne isn't the malicious type. I suggest you cooperate with him. It'll be better than whatever Miss Fall's employer has planned for both of you. Don't you dare. Cinder hissed angrily. If you wish, I can lift the illusion and go find this Mr. Tyrion. I'm sure he'd be pleased to see you. The blonde countered pointedly. Cinder just growled and went back to silently glaring at him. Emerald's red eyes flickered back between the two of them desperately. The blue-eyed Ruby simply shrugged and leaned on the walls and folded her arms. Her orders had been to stay there and guard the two of them, and so that was what she was going to do. Mr. Osborne. Osborne looked back from his contemplation of the world beneath him. RWBY. Or other Ruby, I suppose. The blonde waif bobbed her head in acknowledgement even as she looked around in interest. If I may ask, how did you get here? Osborne asked somewhat warily as he watched a blonde who had somehow appeared in his office curiously glance around the room. I took the lift. The blonde replied dryly as she came to his bookshelf and ran one finger along the spines of several books before picking up a thin book from one of his shelves. Osborne decided not to comment on the fact that he most certainly had a lot more security around his office than just one lift, and none of them would have let the blonde through without informing him first. The Gift of the Moon. Osborne observed the blonde flip it open. It's an interesting fairy tale. Have you heard of it before? The blonde girl shook her head. My homeland doesn't have many fairy tales. There were more important things to do. She elaborated with a sidelong glance at the gray-haired man, and yes, that means I'm not one of your relics. Osborne breathed in slowly with an expression of disappointment. I see you spoke to Crow. It wasn't a question. The blonde hummed in agreement as she placed the book back on the shelf and primly sat down in the seat across from Osborne. It's an interesting fairy tale. Originally, the world had a sun which bathed half the world in light. At night, there was no moon and no stars, and therefore absolutely no light at all. When humanity decided to try and light the night, they convinced the sun to race faster and faster across the sky, hoping that it could move so fast all the world would be constantly bathed in light. This exhausted the sun so much that it collapsed, falling out of the sky to crash onto the earth. This shattered the sun and spilled all its light. Humanity was forced to make a brand new sun and fill it with the broken sun spilled light. With the new sun doing a better job, the broken sun got stuck as the moon, lighting the night sky, but never bright enough to make it day. Osborne paused as he noticed a twitch of anger on the blonde's face. Many versions of this story tend to emphasize the fact that it was humanity's fault that the sun was broken in the first place. He then points out that, while they did damage the sun, they were also the ones to correct the mistake by creating a new, brighter sun. Osborne observed. And then they abandoned the broken old one there for the new shiny one. You misunderstand, the story is a symbol of what humanity can achieve when it works together. Back then, the world used to be divided between light and darkness. However, humanity overcame its flaws to unite together and make the darkness brighter for all. Indeed. The blonde waif smiled thinly, then maybe it's time that humanity faced their problems instead of patching it up with newer and shiny things. Who knows, they might even make a new moon in the process. Osborne wasn't quite sure what to make of that. May I know why you're here today, Miss Rose? I plan to take RWBY out of Beacon. Osborne closed his eyes in resignation. He had been afraid of this. Are you certain that is a wise decision, Miss Rose? The blonde pointedly looked beyond Osborne at the window he knew overlooked the city of Vale, which was currently under attack by Grimm. He'd also heard about the odd Grimm in the dorms, so he could only sigh. I still think the risk is too great. Understandable, I suppose, but let me outline it for you. Perhaps you'll feel better once you understand my reasoning. The blonde waif smiled disarmingly. First, you currently have Cinder downstairs. She's the current Fall Maiden, so you will never be able to tell anyone that you have captured the perpetrator behind the attack on Beacon, nor can you punish her beyond keeping her locked up, which can't be good for Vale's morale, considering how much damage was done and how close they came to losing everything. She's also paralyzed, so she can't run away, much less fight back. Hell, she can't even wipe her own butt anymore. She obtained all that power, but now she can't use it after everything she has done to obtain it. Fitting, given what she did to the previous Fall Maiden, I suppose. And unlike the previous Fall Maiden, she'll be conscious and screaming the entire time. The blonde smile widened as he continued to insidiously drive Osborne further and further into a mental corner with every word. I'd argue that's a torture worse than anything you could ever possibly inflict on someone like her. Your primary issue here will be the fact that she can't resist when someone comes for her life and her powers, hence you will need to guard her. This segues nicely into my original request. But Beacon the way it is, you and your forces will be divided between rebuilding Beacon, keeping it safe, and the fact that you now have two very big and very vulnerable targets in the same place. You may be confident that you can repulse any intruders who come knocking, but let's be honest, you're not a god. You can only be in one place at once. All it's going to take is a single distraction, which is more or less how you let this mess happen in the first place. I see. As he watched the old man stare back unseeingly, consumed by all the variables he had just been slapped with, the blonde waif mused that it was a good thing he was a nice guy. If he ever went bad, Osborne probably would have folded in one go. The blonde waif decided to throw the old man a bone and smiled neutrally. Incidentally, may I ask for a favor? Osborne tiredly nodded. If it is within my power. Please allow the girl with the green hair, Emerald, to take care of the Fall Maiden. That is somewhat difficult. Osborne hesitated before continuing to explain. With her particular semblance, the chance that she takes the opportunity to bring Cinder away is too great. You do not need to worry on that front. I'll personally ensure that she is unable to leave the tower unless you allow it. And how do you plan to do that? I have my ways. Naruto noted the look Osborne was giving him and decided to throw the old man another bone. I'll talk to her before I take RWBY with me. You are free to come and see what I do. But that would be agreeable with me, Miss Rose. At the same time, in another part of the building, another blonde waif, completely identical to the one that was currently in Osborne's office, was in Beacon Academy's library, calmly picking up book after book and rapidly flipping through them. Each time he did so, a copy would materialize in his ring and sort itself in his own library. He was fully serious about being able to teach RWBY everything that Beacon could, but to do that, he first needed to know what exactly Beacon could offer in the first place. The library itself was completely empty, presumably no one was in the mood to read anything in the current situation. So, it was very obvious when someone entered the building. He could hear heels clacking down the aisles as if looking for something until they came to a stop at the one he was in. RWBY? I heard someone say they saw the speaker stop short. You're the other RWBY, right? The blonde girl continued what she was doing and greeted the newcomer without looking at her. Miss Nikos. A brief glance told him that she was still wearing that blouse and jeans combo, but she had added a shield and a spear to the ensemble. The blouse was a little torn, which indicated that she had been in battle before this. Probably in the city. Oh. Hi. Purah said awkwardly. The blue-eyed blonde tilted her head at the redhead. Is something the matter? No, in fact, I had wanted to speak to you personally. Purah bowed lowly. Thank you for saving my life. When I went up there, I knew without a doubt I would not have survived. But I did because of you. I am in your debt. You are very welcome. The blonde responded simply, but you can ignore the debt. I cannot. Purah countered mulishly. Then how would you feel if you saved a friend and now she wants to be in debt to you? The blonde waif smiled as she heard the redhead speechlessly grunt in annoyance. What are you doing? Copying books. Blonde Ruby admitted blandly, I'm sort of memorizing them I guess. The bewildered girl stared at him for a moment, I'm taking Ruby out of Beacon Academy. It's not safe here for her at the moment. Gotta make sure she doesn't slack off while we're out there after all. The blue-eyed blonde explained with some humor, he could hear Ruby already complaining about it in the background. Oh I see. Something in Purah's tone prompted him to turn around and look at her properly, is everything alright, Miss Nikos? No. It's nothing to trouble you with. Purah flushed at the look of concern and shook her head. Blonde Ruby eyed her critically for a long moment before he spoke, you've been getting nightmares, haven't you? Purah took a step back as if she had been slapped, how did you? I can sense negative emotions. The blonde girl admitted quietly. So, you feel afraid that every battle you enter will be your last one. Every night, you dream of that moment again and you can't sleep. The blonde replied as clinically as he could, it's not uncommon amongst people who have had a brush with death. It happened to me as well. Even you. The blonde laughed a harsh bark of laughter, I've forgotten how many times I've nearly died. But the worst is always the first. Purah came a little closer, how did you deal with it? Where I come from, life wasn't easy. Children became soldiers and mercenaries at 12. Most got their first kill at 13. Even earlier if they weren't affiliated with the bigger powers around. The blonde smoothly ignored Purah's horrified expression, obviously, therapists wasn't really a thing back there, so something like this, you either get over it yourself or let it affect you and stop you from being the best you can be. In which case, you just die for nothing. And I really didn't want to die. So, I kept moving, kept fighting, kept training. Eventually, it stopped bothering me. On impulse, Purah leaned forward and captured the surprised blonde in a tight hug. The blasé way he spoke about his childhood tore at her heartstrings. The blonde just stood there stiffly for a moment before patting her back awkwardly, you should probably go talk to a therapist though. I tend to be a very bad example of how to do things. Purah chuckled, I will, I promise. Everyone ready? Crow looked back as Yang and a blonde Ruby climbed on board his personal bullhead. Yang threw up her hand, road trip. She roared happily. Crow glanced at the other blonde, where to first? The short girl smiled thinly, we should probably head to Patch first. Mr. Xiaolong probably wouldn't be happy if we left without a word. Plus, I want to fix Miss Xiaolong's arm before we set off for real. Wait what? Being sealed wasn't really that bad honestly. He was starting to think Kurama was just a big whiny baby. It's not like he even knew whether or not any time had passed. Most of the time, he just slept. At least until a little silver-eyed girl picked him up. Now he just pitied Remnant. It wasn't ready for his particular brand of chaos. Please enjoy the story and review. Your reviews encourage me to write faster and better. Note. Reunited this chapter because something went wrong with ff.net and the new chapter wouldn't show up for me even after restarting and clearing caches. Wait what? Yang spun around to stare at the blonde version of her baby sister, but the cheeky little shit just winked at her before slumping over again. She could actually see the long vibrant yellow hair sinking back into Ruby's skull until it reached her customary neck-length cut before it turned back its usual reddish black. It was actually rather disturbing. And when Ruby's eyes opened again, they were back to their usual dark silver. The two of them stared at each other for a moment before she suddenly winced and grabbed her head, oh me head. Ruby? Yang hurried to her sister's side, what happened? Ruby grimaced painfully, Sensei didn't realize I would get hit with the feedback coming from his clones as well. Feedback? Clones? The bewildered blonde wasn't happy, she hated seeing her baby sis in pain, are you sure this is really alright? Ruby trembled a bit before nodding slowly as the pain slowly went away, Sensei says that I'm just not used to it. After a couple more times, it shouldn't affect me at all. Screw what your ring says. Yang yelled in frustration, her eyes watering a little, ever since you started using that ring, you've been getting hurt non-stop. Ruby hugged her big sister, I'm okay, Yang. Really? It hurts, but I can deal with it. Eventually it'll stop hurting. The two sisters stayed like that for a while before Yang eventually relented and her tense shoulders finally relaxed, I'm holding you to that. Yang slumped into the chair next to her, so? What was that your ring was saying about my arm? Ruby's dark silver eyes gleamed, pain all but forgotten, Sensei can heal your arm. Heal my arm? Yang chuckled wearily, it gone Ruby. Unless he can make me an entirely new arm or something, I don't think a bit of healing is gonna cut it. That's exactly what he's going to do. Ruby chirped, brand new arm? No biggie. His exact words. Yang's eyes went wide for a moment, seriously. Ruby nodded violently, her eyes still gleaming, and that's not all. His clones, the ones he made in front of you. After they ended, I saw everything they were doing. The short girl bounced around violently. Normally when he takes over, I only see what's happening or what's he doing, but with the clones, I can even understand what he's thinking at those times. Ruby squealed happily, it was amazing. I saw one of them speak to Professor Osborn, and I saw another saving Emerald and Cinder, Amigashamagash it was so awesome. Ruby yelled at the top of her voice. And he's going to teach you how to do that? Yang replied skeptically. Ruby immediately zipped to her sister and shook her happily, that's the best part. I already know how to do it because I got those memories. In the ring, the blonde man was suddenly filled with dread as he heard what Ruby was saying. He had an awfully shrewd idea about what that idiot girl was about to do. Ruby, her mentor's voice suddenly echoed in her mind, just because you know how to do them doesn't mean you have the control to make them work properly. Don't do this. I'm just going to try one. Please see. No Ruby. Bad Ruby. Stop. Yes Ruby. His newfound apprentice cackled with glee. The blonde stuck in the ring just facepalmed. Ruby slowly and clumsily made a few hand signs before touching the bullhead's wall next to Yang. Majin. Kokoni Arazu no Jutsu. Demonic illusion. False surroundings technique. Yang squawked with surprise as the wall she had been leaning on suddenly turned transparent. Invisible. Completely, fucking, see-through. The blonde girl with lilac-colored eyes watched for a moment, wary of any possible decompression, considering how high in the skies they were at the moment. When nothing seemed to happen, she slowly moved her hand forward until she touched something cold and solid. The wall was still there, but it was invisible. Uncle QROW, you better come see this. Their uncle stumbled out of the cockpit after he had hurriedly put it on autopilot at his niece's shouts when he caught sight of the huge hole in his bullhead. He immediately looked at his wiser niece, are we going to die? Yang rapped her knuckle on the invisible wall, and Crow heard the metallic thud of flesh on steel, it's there, but we can't see it. Apparently, her ring taught her how to do it. Alright, that's a neat trick and all, but she can fix that right? 'Cause that's going to look tacky as hell. Both of them looked at the youngest member of their family who was currently bouncing around the bullhead like a squirrel on a sugar high. This is awesome. I'm gonna try and do the clone thing. She crossed her index and middle fingers on both hands together in a plus shape. She screwed up her face in concentration before announcing triumphantly. Page Bunshin no Jutsu. Shadow clone technique. There was a quiet poof of smoke and nothing else. Then Ruby promptly fainted with a quiet gah. The blonde man in the ring performed a double facepalm. Pro and Yang shared a look before Yang calmly rolled Ruby's unconscious body under the seats. Pro took another look at the new hole in his ship before he went back to the cockpit. He resolved to get blind-sodding drunk the moment they landed. Yang Xiaolong was a simple man. Formerly a member of Team STRQ, he currently worked as a teacher at the nearby Signal Academy. Some probably looked down on him for not living up to his potential, as they called it, but he had bigger priorities in life. First and foremost being his two beautiful daughters. One of which was currently being lugged on the other's good shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He had heard about Yang's arm naturally, and he was glad to see that she wasn't as depressed as he had thought she would be, but what was up with Ruby? Didn't Crow tell him that she was going to be released from the hospital today? Actually, why were they even here in the first place? So, he asked his brother-in-law, Crow. What's going on? Why are you guys here? Shouldn't Ruby and Yang still be in school? Long story. Very long story. Drinks first. His ex-wife's brother mumbled, his face gray and exhausted, and walked right past him. The sound of tinkling bottles told Ty that his brother-in-law had done a swan dive into the stash of alcohol that he kept specifically for Crow because he himself didn't actually drink all that often outside of social occasions. Yang just dropped her sister onto the ground with a thud before falling into Ty's embrace face first. Hey dad. It's been a while. He looked at the crown of yellow hair nuzzling his chest. Oh, Yang. I'm so sorry about your arm. Sake. Ruby's gonna do something about it. That brought Ty up short. Ruby? Do something about a missing arm? What was he missing here? Ow. Ruby? Said girl looked around in confusion as she got up from the ground and dusted her clothes off. Huh. We're here already? That was fast. Yang may or may not have snarled something rather impolite. Luckily it was muffled. Let's go back inside and rest a bit first. Ty concluded wisely. In their home, Crow casually walked out of the kitchen hugging an entire armload of bottles. After everyone had gathered at the family table and Ty had made everyone a warm cup of milk to sip, minus Crow who was already guzzling his second bottle of whiskey down, Ty looked around the table and sighed, so where do we begin? Ruby? Ruby? Hey. Ty quirked one brow at his youngest daughter, what are they talking about Ruby? RWBY fidgeted in her seat and played with her mug. How much do you know about the attack on Beacon, Dad? Only what I've seen on the scrolls and what Crow's told me. And yes, that includes you dyeing your hair and looking like a mini Yang. And doing some very dangerous looking things. Tai frowned. Your Uncle Crow said it had something to do with you finding a really strong teacher. RWBY immediately perked up. Do you want to meet him? I can do that. Tai blinked. Meet him? How? Like by scroll call? RWBY laughed brightly. Nope. Like this. She promptly grabbed her ring and slumped over in her chair, much to Tai's shock. His shock only increased when RWBY's hair literally began growing and turning a vibrant sunshine yellow right in front of his very eyes. Suddenly the transformation stopped and RWBY's hair began sinking back into her skull. Dark silver eyes snapped open again and RWBY jerked back up in her seat with a disbelieving expression. He kicked me out. That great big jerk kicked me back out. I didn't even know he could do that. Yang and Crow could only chuckle at that. Apparently even ring spirits could get annoyed when RWBY dumped all her work on them. RWBY, Tai said slowly. What was that? Okay, RWBY pouted as she began. So I found this ring at Mom's grave when I was 4. I thought it was hers so I just kept it. I remember we had just lost Mom around that time. I didn't really understand anything and you were busy. For a moment, RWBY looked a little lost and Taeyang couldn't bring himself to chide her for it. He at least had the decency to look ashamed. He had not taken it well when Raven had left him, to the point Summer had had to take care of Yang. And when Summer had passed away, it had hit him even harder than it had when Raven left. Yang had been the one to take care of RWBY at that time, even though she had only been 6 and had done so until he had resurfaced from his depression. It was one of the reasons why the two sisters were so close to each other. Anyway, until I was 5, I thought it was just a normal ring, a memento from Mom. Then one day when I was visiting Mom's grave alone again, I was attacked by a Beowulf. RWBY scuffed her feet on the kitchen floor. I remember screaming a lot and everything going black. When I woke up again, it was a few months later. That's when I met Sensei. He was in the ring and he had been the one to save me. So, he's been around since you were 5. Taeyang said slowly. It sounded completely and utterly insane, but he was withholding judgment for now. Yeah. RWBY confirmed. Most of the time he was asleep. The times he was awake, he usually wouldn't bother commenting on anything unless I asked him, and it's not like he had a lot of answers anyway. In fact, I think I taught him more than he taught me. I even had to explain what auras and semblances were to him. The slip of a girl shrugged. Other than that, I only learned how to go into the ring when I was 10 and we didn't start sparring with each other until I was in my first year at Signal. I've seen him do a lot of freaky stuff by then, so I knew he was pretty strong. RWBY paused to take a sip of milk to wet her throat. Then when Beacon was attacked and I saw the dragon, I just knew that we were all screwed. We could have brought the entire Legion army here and it still wouldn't even have tickled that thing. So I went into the ring and asked Sensei for help. He said okay, came out of the ring, saw what was happening, and then he kicked all their asses. RWBY finished proudly. I pinched the bridge of his nose, and we can't see the Sensei of yours. At all? Nope. RWBY blinked and tilted her head before squawking loudly. What the hell do you mean? Yes, they can. RWBY? I didn't say anything. Tai started before Yang just waved at him. Don't bother. It's that Sensei guy. She gets like this whenever she's talking to him. The three of them watched as RWBY stood up and paced around the kitchen table with a wrinkled nose. It looked like she was arguing with someone before she eventually and grudgingly took off the ring around her neck. She placed the ring in the middle of the table where it just sat there innocently until it actually began to glow. One heartbeat later, the ring disappeared with a flash and there was now 5 people in the kitchen. The stranger was a tall man, slightly taller than Crow, with longish spiky blonde hair, dressed in a simple white shirt, a black vest over the shirt, and a pair of dark brown slacks. His crystal blue eyes shone with mirth, and he had 3 scars on each cheek, resembling a set of whiskers. Mr. Xiaolong. The man bowed politely, ignoring all the open-mouthed stares he was getting. It's good to finally meet you, although I wish I had been able to do it sooner, considering I've been in your daughter's care for the past 10 years. Taeyang very calmly walked over to Crow and picked up one of the bottles lying in front of him and proceeded to chug its contents down in one go. Then he put the empty bottle down and turned around to firmly shake the other man's hand. It's good to meet you too, son. You got a name? My name is Uzumaki Naruto. The tall man replied politely. The silence stretched. You can actually come out of the ring. That was Crow. You had a name. That was RWBY. You were a hot guy. And that was Yang. The unruffled blonde smiled thinly. In order, I can come out only under very specific circumstances. Yes, I have a name. You never asked. And finally, what made you think I wasn't male? I believe RWBY has mentioned my gender more than once to you before. What? I thought you just identified as a guy or something. Like seriously, Dad, you should have seen him when he's possessing Ruby. He was even more feminine than her. Oh I. Taeyang's eyebrow rose in question, possession. Naruto just nodded. I've been in the ring long enough for me to tinker with the restrictions a little, so I know several ways for me to escape the ring, at least temporarily. The easiest involves taking over the ring holder's body. If done properly, I can lend my strength to the person I'm possessing without undue harm to said person. The blonde paused before grimacing. I won't lie to you. I can take that method to its logical extreme and completely take over the ring's holder. That in effect lets me escape the ring until the body I'm using either dies or breaks down completely. Naruto did not shy away from the horrified looks he was getting. It's not something I will ever do willingly. But I just want you to know that I won't hide anything from you. Ruby is already aware of this, and I have promised her that I will never ever do something like that to her, no matter what the situation is like. He received some more grudging looks, although Ruby just looked proud, before he continued, the method I'm currently using allows me to come out independently, but only for a short period of time. Not only that, this form also heavily limits my abilities and takes a lot of my energy, so I don't like doing it. Hold. Crow loudly interjected, if you can do that, why didn't you just do this earlier? Last time, I didn't get the chance to say or even recommend anything before Ruby pushed me out. The blonde noted dryly, this time, I was ready for it. Everyone looked at Ruby, and the girl promptly blushed a bright red. Taeyang just frowned, you mentioned restrictions, son. Who did this to you? That's a rather complicated question. The blonde man admitted. He rubbed his chin for a moment before smiling in a distinctly predatory manner, they were relatives of mine, in a manner of speaking. They were getting a little uppity and entitled, so I decided to spank them around a bit. I ended up scaring them so badly, they sacrificed themselves to lock me away. They sacrificed themselves to lock you away? Crow murmured aghast. The restrictions wouldn't have held otherwise. The blonde shrugged carelessly, I was too strong for them to contain with half-hearted measures. Besides, they were going to kill themselves off for me and save me the trouble of doing it myself, so I figured I'd just sit back and treat it like a nice long vacation. Crow shivered, just what an saggy tits had his family bumbled into. It was sounding more and more like they had stumbled onto something that was even worse than Salem. Naruto saw the look on his face and shook his head as he sat down next to Ruby, don't worry, I don't mean any of you harm. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just here to help the kid. He finished by fondly tousling Ruby's hair. Ruby promptly knocked his hand away and kicked his ankle with a pout. Taeyang's brows scrunched a little at that little interaction. The two of them were acting really close to each other. You never even told me you had a name. Ruby grumbled under her breath. Naruto just grinned widely. He had been waiting to pull a Kurama on Ruby for ages, like I said, you never asked. Ruby pouted even harder. Taeyang nodded slowly, and now you plan to keep Ruby safe by taking her around Remnant and training her. Naruto met his gaze and nodded faintly, that's about it. Do not worry, I'll ensure that she maintains contact with you on a regular basis. I can't guarantee that she'll be absolutely safe, but I have no intention of putting her in danger. We invited Yang to come with us as well, and Yang has agreed. Taeyang gave his eldest daughter a sidelong glance, and when she just shrugged, he sighed in resignation. I guess I can accept that. Taeyang reluctantly nodded after a brief period of silence. After gaining the man's reluctant acceptance, he figured it was about time that he brought out a gift as a token of his goodwill, so Naruto looked at Ruby's elder sister, before we continue, Yang, will you please come here? The girl looked up with a startled expression, she had been so overwhelmed by everything so far that she had completely forgotten about what the man had said when he had boarded the bullhead. Warily, she approached the other blonde. Naruto just gave her an amused look before closing his eyes to focus. It was tiny bit more difficult than normal in this form, but still far from impossible. All at once, everyone in the room felt it as a pressure crushed down on them. Crow and Yang's eyes widened as they recognized a familiar feeling, but it wasn't as dangerous or as threatening as it had been in Beacon, and they could still move. Even Taeyang was now standing there wide-eyed in wonder. 9 small black and oddly shaped beads and 3 larger black orbs slowly materialized around the whiskered blonde man before he pushed out with one hand, sending the 9 oddly shaped ones scattering away for some reason, while the 3 larger ones hung behind him. Then he reached out and grasped the stump of Yang's right arm. Crow and Taeyang watched in shock and a bit of fear for her when Yang gasped and stiffened. Sweat began beading her forehead and pain lanced through her entire body, but she held strong because she had felt something. The nerve endings on her stump were flaring to life, and that was before a glowing limb started growing from said stump. She powered through the pain and watched in complete and utter fascination as her arm was reconstructed somehow, from pure light. All at once, the pressure lifted again, and the blonde man slumped into his chair. He barely had enough energy to give them a wan smile and a wave before his body wavered like a reflection in water and disappeared, leaving behind a ring on the chair and a room full of stunned people. Yang shook her new arm and clenched her new fingers. She poked her new limb tentatively. It felt like an arm. She had an arm again. She had both arms again. She spun on her father and her uncle. "Alright, we're keeping him. I don't care what you two say and that's final." That night, as Ruby laid in her childhood bed again, she touched the ring hanging around her neck once more. SENSEI. NOTHING. She smiled as she could practically feel her teacher quirking one eyebrow at her. "Sensei. Yeah? Can you get out of ring permanently?" "Why? What do you mean, why? Isn't it a bit sad to just stay inside there forever?" "Not really." Her teacher was silent for a moment before he continued, "Honestly, I don't even know how long I've been in here before I met you. Could have been months. Could have been years. Could have been decades. Could have been centuries. I don't even know if my family is alive. And even if they were, I don't know where they are. I only know they are not on Remnant. Couldn't you go find them if you got out?" Her teacher was silent again. She got the impression he was looking at the shattered moon above them just like she was. "Unlikely. Dimensional travel isn't something I can do easily and without much preparation. Even then, without access to certain items, I have no idea where I will end up. Any gain I obtained would be outweighed by the effort I had to put in to get there in the first place." Ruby smiled. "So you're here to stay?" "Possibly. What's on your mind, kid?" "I'll be your family. Yang too." The ring twitched. "I'm not training you just because I'm a nice guy, you know. There's a reason I helped you obtain chakra and plan to teach you my techniques. No matter what I said, a lock is a lock. Even if I have the key with me, there's only so much I can do to it from the inside. I need someone to unlock it from the outside. And to do that, you need to have, at the very least, a certain level of skill with chakra." Ruby smirked. "You said so much, but it just sounds like you're being shy." "Go to sleep, Ruby. Do you think Miss Glinda is pretty?" "I think she's pretty. And single. Very single." Back in Vale, a certain blonde teacher suddenly felt the urge to find a certain wayward student and assign them extra training. "Ruby?" "What?" "Just trying to motivate you." Naruto triple facepalmed. As the next morning dawned bright and clear, Ruby was woken up when Yang crashed into her room and leapt into her bed. "Wake up, sleepyhead." "Wha?" The sleepy silver-eyed girl grunted intelligibly and tried to kick her older sister back out of her bed. "Look, do you want to see something good or not?" Yang said after a quick wrestle, poking her sister here and there between the gaps of her blankets. "Wha?" Yang thrust her scroll into Ruby's face. "Read it." Ruby sleepily squinted at the screen. Ushni Dust Company, holding concert charity ball to celebrate the upgrading of Atlas's security software after tragic incident in Vale. Ruby shot up, now completely awake, heiress of Shni Dust Company, Weiss Shni, slated to perform. She squinted at the date stated in the article. "It's due 2 weeks from now." "Yep. How about it? Feel like crashing a concert?" Ruby sniggered. "Deal." "Simon, let's go plan on how to get there." As the two of them ran down the stairs happily, they came up short as they saw their uncle already packed and dressed. His eyes were still a little bloodshot from all the drinking he had been doing yesterday, and he swayed on his feet a little bit, but that was basically normal for the man. Where are you going, Uncle Crow?" "Sorry, Pipsqueak. Osmond called me back for a mission." "Oh, you're not joining us?" "Afraid not. I'm the only he's got that can do this mission right now. I'll try to catch up with you guys afterwards though." "Stay safe, Uncle Crow." The two girls chorused as Crow left with a quick wave. The two of them then hurried to the Tai Yang's room, where there was a huge world map hanging on one of the walls. Ruby placed one finger on the small island west of Vale before moving it northeast. "We'll need to move past Vale, then catch a boat to Vidal before we take another one to Atlas, on the south end of Solidas. Doesn't look that far at least." Why not just take a ship there directly?" "It's a training trip, remember?" Ruby murmured. "I think Sensei wants us to walk most of the way. He was saying something about endurance training." Yang blanched. Can I reconsider this whole trip thing?" "Nope." Ruby looked back at the map. "We've found Weiss, now all we need to do is pick her up and find Blake." Yang patted her back and the two of them prepared to go and pack up. This will be the day, feat Casey Lee Williams, Jeff Williams. Salem liked to think she was wise and cunning. And she was. She knew all of Osmond's tricks. She knew how to subvert his men and how to use her pieces to influence events around Remnant before committing to a fatal strike. She knew how Osmond worked and how to counter his moves. It had worked perfectly for centuries, had it not? Sure, she had been pushed back again and again, but she had never outright failed. Every time she was pushed back, she permanently made another part of the board her own, worsening Osmond's overall situation bit by bit, slowly tightening the noose around his neck until he would have had nowhere to go, reincarnation beddomed, no allies to call his own, and no power to resist. Eventually, she would have won so utterly and completely that Osmond would have no choice but to submit to her. Therefore, if one of her plans had failed, the only one at fault here would be her subordinates for being so useless, was it not? Cinder's failure had had cascading effects. The Fall Maiden's powers were now essentially lost to her, despite the overwhelming advantage Cinder had previously obtained. The attack on Beacon had been crushed, not deflected, not blocked, not reduced, but crushed in its entirety by an unknown piece, and she had lost two major ones of her own in one go. Cinder and one of her oldest children. The second attack she had ordered had only made things worse. She had thought to strike while Vale, and indeed Beacon's defenses were still weak, but again, her move had been foiled by the same unknown piece. And because she had revealed her hand, Osmond would now be squatting on Cinder like a mother hen squatted on her eggs. Cinder wouldn't even be able to fight back because her spine had been ruthlessly snapped into three separate pieces last she heard. Ironic. The power was there, in one of her pawns, and she couldn't even move or touch it, to say nothing of her other plans that depended on Cinder's subtlety, desperation and ruthlessness. For all of Tyrion's brutality, Hazel's strength and Watt's wits, none of them were capable of subtly operating in society like Cinder and her group had once been. The thought rankled Salem something fierce. Beacon still stood, damaged, but it still stood, and that meant it still had the potential to become a thorn in her side once more in the future. The unknown piece had gone missing after her second attack, and no amount of effort on her part had unearthed it yet, though that was just a matter of time she supposed. She had an army of Grimm looking for them after all. That left Osmond free to focus on Cinder, and while he was there, Vale would rally around him, so another attack would be annoying at best and futile at worst. It would keep them busy and slow their efforts at rebuilding, unless she was willing to commit something big to it. And if she did that, there was nothing to say that Osmond wouldn't just spirit himself and Cinder away to Atlas on the sly, and keeping her forces focused on harassing Vale would just reduce the effectiveness of her moves elsewhere. In addition, communications were still online, and that meant that not only had Cinder failed to isolate Vale from the rest of the world while simultaneously striking at another one of Osmond's pieces, Ironwood. It got even worse from there, as while Atlas had been blamed for having their mechs corrupted so easily, they had turned that around and used that as an excuse to upgrade their internal security even further, so now Watts was locked out of Atlas's network. He would have to go there personally if she wanted to do anything with that side of the board, and even that would take a while. That left Anima, and by extension, Mistral, for her to play her next move. So, as the white-haired woman sat on her throne pondering her next move, one hand at her temples and another tapped at the table with long black nails, a fire burned in her ruby eyes as she glared at her men for their failures. "It wasn't my fault." The Scorpion Faunus protested as politely as he could manage. "I followed the directions Watts gave me down to the letter, but there was nothing there." "Enough." Salem crooned softly, the man's whining grated on her ears. "You will go to Mistral. Look for Lionheart. I will provide you with further instructions once you have arrived." She looked at the giant hulking man next to Tyrion. "Hazel, I will leave it to you to contact Cinder's liaison in the White Fang. Obtain their cooperation by any means necessary." Both of them bowed deeply before leaving her throne room. Once she had silence again, one long nail absent-mindedly traced the red veins decorating her bone-white face. Her thoughts consumed with the unknown piece. Her moves were seemingly done at random and were too straightforward compared to what Osmond would have done. Which meant that she was most likely not in Osmond's camp and had no prior information to the attack. She had simply been reacting to the things around her. That and the fact that she had apparently left the Vale only further reinforced that line of reasoning. And that thought led further to the possibility of seducing her into her own camp. But first, she would have to find the piece, she would have to learn what made her tick, and then, she would personally force her to submit or die by her hand. The girl had obtained that dubious honor at the very least. "Osmond, I'm approaching the Grimsland. As planned, I'll be out of contact for the next week." Osmond nodded as he beheld Crow's visage on his scroll. "Very well. And what about your nieces? Are they well?" Crow's face showed a speckle of amusement. "Well and being trained. As promised, they've been calling their dad and I every night. They're not sharing any details, but whatever it is that Ring guy is doing, it's enough to put Yang through the ringer. I don't think I've ever heard her curse like that before." Osmond could only sigh. He had been absolutely shocked to find out that the spirit in the ring was actually capable of leaving it as and when he wished, although only temporarily. But that only made the situation all the more serious as he for one did not find the situation amusing at all. "I still believe that he could have trained her in Beacon just fine, as well as provide another skilled protector for the Vale as a whole. He doesn't strike me as the type." Crow admitted, he had told Ozpin almost everything he had heard that night, except the part about the ring spirit's origins, because he really didn't want to complicate the relationship between the two beings even more. He's only here for RWBY. The rest could burn and he really wouldn't care. He'll just go back to sleep. I understand. He really did, but it didn't mean he had to like it. Anything else before we end communications? How's the fall maiden doing? Ozpin nearly smirked at that, badly. Mr. Uzumaki offered Miss Ustrite to let her take care of Miss Fall in front of Miss Fall herself, on the condition that she submit to one of his runic spells that prevented her from leaving the tower without my permission, unless her life is threatened. The idea that she would need someone to take care of her seemed to gall her quite a bit if I read her right, and it only got worse when Miss Ustrite accepted without any hesitation. She has yet to speak another word since then, but I think there may be some hope for her at least. Crow chuckled wearily, be nice if she could tell us what Salem's next move at least. In time perhaps. Ozpin allowed. Once Crow had ended communications, Ozpin leaned back into his chair and sighed. Uzumaki Naruto was a conundrum to him. He seemed to carry some sort of hope of redeeming Miss Fall, if only for Miss Ustrite's sake, but at the same time, he wasn't willing to actively take a role in anything beyond Miss Rose, Miss Xiaolong and possibly the rest of Team RWBY, despite his immense skill and ability. Ozpin certainly had no illusions that he was capable of persuading a behemoth like him to do anything, much less forcing him. Not after he had taken that wyvern out in one move. And especially not after he had already helped them thwart Salem twice. Despite his words, he didn't really want Mr. Uzumaki as another protector of Vale, though that would be nice bonus considering Salem was most likely already interested in him. If Salem threatened his wards, he would no doubt respond in kind. No, his main concern here was if Salem managed to bend his ear with her honey-slathered words. That could not be allowed to happen. If Mr. Uzumaki had stayed in Beacon, at least he would be able to watch out for any overtures coming from that woman. In addition, his care of Miss Rose's well-being was a clear-cut opening. It wasn't impossible to influence Miss Rose. All he needed to do was get Miss Rose to move to the right position at the right time, and Mr. Uzumaki would presumably deal with everything else, like he had during the attack on Beacon. The only problem was if Mr. Uzumaki detected his manipulations beforehand, it would most likely sour both him and Miss Rose to his overtures beyond any hope of recovery, and that must not happen. What should I do? Ozpin wondered to himself quietly. There was no one who could give him an answer. There was a new player on the board and he had no idea how to deal with him. He sighed heavily and turned back to his desk where his paperwork lay. Unbeknownst to him, a black spiral sigil, etched into the very back of the bookshelf and hidden by the neatly arranged books, gleamed faintly before fading away from view once more. On a balcony at a certain cafe in Vale, an orange-haired man and his diminutive accomplice with the multicolored hair and heterochromic eyes sat eating lunch nervously. This in itself was nothing new. They had been nervous ever since the attack on Beacon. For some reason, no one had seen fit to come after him or Neo, but then he supposed they had bigger fish to fry or interrogate, what with Cinder and her gang being captured, and he was nothing but a useful, spare, random tool they had used that wouldn't know anything of substance. Everyone else was out in force, either making sure no additional grim attacks happened like the one a few days ago, or rounding up stray White Fang members. Any remaining spare manpower was directed towards rebuilding from what he could see. No, they were nervous for another reason entirely. It felt like they were waiting for their execution, and it had to do with the illusory claws resting along their spines. He wished he could say it was just a bad joke, but no, he could feel like that unsettling claw-like sharpness resting all along his spine like some giant predator resting its paws on his back. Today, it had begun twitching and moving a little restlessly. He took it to mean that monster that looked like that annoying little red was on her way. Just then, the door to the balcony opened and a blond man that looked to be about the same age as him, dressed in a simple vest, shirt and slacks combo stepped through. He had an odd set scaring on his face, set against a tough and angular face, that made him look like a faunus with whiskers and gave him a rugged sort look, the sort you would normally see on daywork laborers. And he was carrying a box of ice cream for some reason. Torchwick only graced him with the briefest of glances, fully expecting the man to head to the only other table on the balcony when he did a double take. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. Crystalline blue with slit pupils. Torchwick stiffened as the man approached him with a small smile, and his worst fears were confirmed as he took a seat at the table. Mr. Torchwick. I hope you are doing well. Roman choked as Neo scurried behind him. The blonde wasn't giving off that pressure today, but from the way he walked and held him himself, Neo was still perceptive enough to see that the blonde had skill in spades. Enough to flatten them, semblance or no semblance. The man grinned and rather toothily, it's me. As promised, I've come looking for you. Roman swallowed thickly, beneath the table he gripped his cane tightly, what do you want? We already did everything you requested short of surrendering ourselves. And you never said we had to do that. The blonde man waved his hands. No, no. You did good, finding you in jail would have been more annoying than finding you like this. I'm just here to talk, and if everything goes well, release you from our contract. Everything going well indicated that the man still had something he wanted him to do. Roman wasn't an idiot. Just then, a waiter walked through the door carrying a cup of coffee that he set down in front of the blonde. Anything else I can do for you today, Mr. Uzumaki? The blonde just smiled and waved the waiter off. That'll be all. Thanks. You have a name. Roman observed smarmily, means you're not a ghost. Does that mean that your semblance lets you possess little girls? Behind him Neo squeaked. Not quite. The blonde smiled at Roman's wariness and folded his legs as he took a sip of coffee. It's a bit of a long story. Maybe you'll find out one day. So? What else do you want us to do? Roman gritted out. The blonde blinked slowly before shaking his head. I don't want you to do anything, Mr. Torchwick. You've already fulfilled your side of the contract. If I had any lien, I'd even pay you. As it is, I plan to just talk for a bit before I relieve you of your burden and take my leave. What do you want to talk about? The orange-haired man muttered suspiciously. Where do you come from, Torchwick? Oniyuri. Roman shrugged. If the blonde wanted small talk, he'd give him small talk. Rich parents thought they were too good for Mistral. Then one of the biggest sodding grims I've ever seen came along and boom. Little Torchwick's a beggar and an orphan. Had to steal, scrounge and scrape my way until I hit Vale, where it was peaceful, gentle, kind and most importantly, filled with idiots I could fleece. The blonde nodded, his face blank as he looked over the balcony, one finger tapping on his knee absent-mindedly. It seems to be a running theme amongst Cinder's group. Orphan, abused, outcast. So what? You feel sorry for us? Roman retorted scathingly. In a way. The blonde didn't deny it. I've spent the past couple of days just walking around really. Trying to understand where I am. I've been too busy the last decade or so I never really bothered to pay attention. The thing that struck me the most was how this country, all of them really, seem broken in one way or another. So much apathy and prejudice. It's almost sickening. So what? Roman frowned, he didn't like what he was hearing, it sounded too much like good guy stuff, the kind of stuff that got you smashed into paste by a Nuclevi. You gonna open an orphanage or something? Fix remnant. The blonde smiled at him faintly, maybe in the future. Good luck with it then, but you're going to have count me out. I prefer watching out for myself. Crystalline blue eyes shone warmly, understandable. Have a good day Mr. Torchwick, Miss Neapolitan. For what it's worth, I'm sorry we couldn't have met under better circumstances. Neo and Roman blinked as the claws on their spines dissipated, just like that. The blonde even reached over and tousled Neo's hair before placing the huge box of ice cream in her hands, a gift for the little lady. If Neo could squeal, she would have, Roman was sure. That box was like 5 liters worth of pure joy for her. What? Just like that? The dumbfounded thief blurted out. Just like that? The blonde went back to gazing at the Kingdom of Vale. Roman stepped away hesitantly. You're not going to set the cops on us, right? Nope. The blonde still had his back to them. Roman pulled Neo along and moved a few more steps towards the door, then stopped and hesitated. I'm not saying I don't want to help. You understand right? I'm a thief, a criminal, all I'm good at is heists. I can't do stuff like orphanages. I know, Mr. Torchwick. It's alright. The blonde reassured him, I'm serious. We're done. You are free to go and you won't get any grief from me. Roman pulled Neo along even faster, the door was only that far away and it was home free, but Neo was tugging at his sleeves. Silly girl got bribed and that was all it took to swing her to his side. Seriously, I'm a bad guy. I got a rap sheet a mile long, I got blood on my hands. What do you want me to do? It's okay, Mr. Torchwick. I'm not Cinder. We had a deal and the deal is done. You don't owe me anything. He placed one hand on the doorknob and stilled, RRRGGHH. Neo's tugging on his sleeves got more urgent. He really hadn't taken her for the type to have a bleeding heart. Sadistic. Cruel. Yes. Was it really enough to get on her good side with just 5 liters of ice cream? Well let's say, Roman finally gritted out, hypothetically. Theoretically. If you wanted to fix things, what would you need from a thief? Information mostly. The blonde finally turned around to regard him curiously, who makes the decisions, who funds the decisions, where the funds come from. Simple things like that. There may be more in the future, but I need those first before I can decide. Oh, and like I said, I'm actually pretty bad with technology. I can help with the technology part, but the rest? Those don't come cheap. Torchwick replied warningly. The blonde smiled thinly, you have your specialty, and I know a few tricks that might make your specialty more convenient. As long as you use your specialty on the right targets and share with the people who need it, I don't really care. I might even bring some friends to join you on one of your trips. to gain experience, you see. Roman promptly swirled around and strutted over to the blonde. For Neo's sake, we have a contract. Behind him, Neo rolled her eyes. We have a contract. The blonde replied agreeably. Where to first, partner? Atlas. Ruby decided that she regretted listening to her mentor. The day marked the 4th day of their trip and she was already pretty sick of it. As the two of them trudged through the undergrowth of the forest around Vale, she brushed back her bright green hair and scratched her head vigorously. The remarkably realistic cat ear hairband she was wearing chafed against her scalp. Beside her, she could hear Yang quietly muttering a non-stop stream of curses under her breath. People would be looking for 2 humans, one with dark red hair and one with yellow hair, he had said. Wearing hoods was stupid because people that want to hide their face would just stand out, he had said. Subvert their expectations, he had said. Undermine their thoughts, he had said. Goofy line frontises with green and blue hair colors and contact lenses would be ignored, he had said. He wasn't the one that had to wear a silly hairband while they sweat and toiled. At least he had been nice enough to tell them to ditch the fancy and frilly combat gear. He had taken one look at her and her sister when they were preparing to set out and told them to go back to their rooms and change into something more casual and hardier. Like gym trousers, comfy shirts and tough but comfy shoes. Wearing a skirt and a pair of heels as she climbed hills and crossed rivers would have been a pain in the ass, to say nothing of the sheer amount of sweat leaking out of her. Saggy pants, her combat gear would have been so gross and damp. Someone would ask, why was she sweating so much? It was still just trekking and trudging, right? She was a huntress in training, so one would think that something like that was still pretty easy as far as doing icky stuff was concerned, right? Because sensei was a bastard like that. He had stuck several odd pieces of paper onto their limbs that made everything feel 3 times as heavy and turned something as simple trekking through a forest into a Herculean effort straight from hell. She and Yang had used their aura to deal with it at first and sensei hadn't said anything about that, but the smirk he had sent them said volumes all on its own. And she had found out why, less than an hour later when she and her sister had hit the ground face first, too exhausted to do anything. They hadn't even made it to the foot of the first mountain after landing at one of the ports south of Vale that night. Sensei had been nice enough to help them send out some clones to hunt for food, put up a tent, massage their aching limbs and roll them into bed, but after that, they had to do it themselves. So now they had to carefully make sure that they only used the bare minimum of aura to make the weight feel just short of manageable, while ensuring that they still had enough energy left in the tank at the end of the day so they didn't just fall asleep on the ground in the wild and go hungry. Suffice to say, they had already gone hungry more than once. She regretted ever finding that ring. I regret ever agreeing to this. Yang panted next to her. Ruby sobbed soundlessly and nodded. By unspoken agreement, both of them fell on their asses and began to breath heavily. As if by magic, because she most certainly hadn't seen him following them, her teacher walked out of a shadow of a tree, carrying a bundle of herbs, bottles of saps, insects and various other odds and ends in his arm, squinted at the reddish sky and saluted them carelessly. Done for the day then. Yang flipped him the middle finger while Ruby stuck her tongue out at him. The blonde merely smirked before he put his bundles of herbs and plants aside and started pulling their tents out of the ring on his middle finger and setting them up. She narrowed her eyes at that. What are you doing? Setting up your tents and preparing dinner. The blonde man answered in reply. What she means is, you're being nice. Yang pointed out sarcastically, what are you really up to? Hey now, I'm just happy you know. It took you guys 4 days, but the 2 you finally made it through the day without even stopping once. Figured it was worth a celebration, the other blonde responded cheerfully, and since you're not going to faint tonight, we can finally start learning other stuff too. Yang made angry Yang noises before she fell on her back resignedly. It was humiliating. She had been one of the top fighters in her year, both at Signal and Beacon. But to find that she was unable to even walk for 1 full day until now, albeit with those paperweight thingies on, was really rather humbling. Eventually, Naruto came along and helped them up before passing them a bucket of hot water and a steaming towel to clean themselves up. Where he had got it from, she had no idea, and it was nothing compared to a good long soak in the bathtub, but it still felt heavenly. Off to the side, Sensei had one of his clones sorting out and cataloging all the plants and herbs and other stuff he had picked during the day. He had done this every night since they started, so the 2 girls were more or less used to it by now. For every shred of material he gathered, he would take at least 5 samples if possible, and each sample would be treated differently. One would be left out, one would be dried, one would be steamed, one would be crushed into sap, and the last would be ground into powder. He hadn't offered an explanation for whatever it is he was doing, but the girls had been too tired to ask either way. Once they had changed into some clean and comfy clothes and eaten a roasted chicken or two that the ring spirit had caught from somewhere, Naruto sat them around the fire. "Alright, first thing tonight, we're going to practice doing hand signs for an hour. This will continue every night until you can do all of them on demand at an acceptable speed." Yang held one hand up like a student in a classroom. "Do I need to be here for this? You know, considering I can't do whatever it is RWBY can do. You should if you plan to learn." Naruto noted blandly, "I was planning on helping you obtain chakra as well after you get used to the training. I just didn't want to say anything until I had a more concrete idea of what I need to do." RWBY's eyes went wide and she hurtled into her teacher's midriff with a squeal of happiness. She had suspected it when the blonde had asked her to let Yang hold the ring at night when they slept, but she hadn't dared to ask him to do something so personal. Yang on the other hand, wasn't quite so trusting. "Hold up, before we do that, how about you tell me what exactly is this chakra? Is it similar to aura or something?" "They're similar, but at the same time, different," the blonde noted. He adjusted the little green-haired monkey clambering around him so that she could cuddle on his lap without falling off before clapping his two hands together and spreading them, creating an illusion of the human body in the air before them, like a scroll's hard light projection display, only the blonde was doing it with nothing but his hands. "In the 10 years I spent with RWBY, a good chunk of it was actually spent trying to understand the difference between the two systems. I didn't dare to just help her forge a chakra core and pathway on a whim because it might have crippled her or worse, so I only started after I was absolutely sure it would not harm RWBY or cause her unnecessary pain. At first, I didn't think it was even possible," the blonde admitted, "but the two systems had both too many similarities and too many contradictions for me to ignore. However, they both started, ended and centered on a person's soul." Yang stared in interest as two pools appeared in the illusion of the human body before her. The first was labeled Yang, and the second was labeled Yin. "Your aura is birthed from the Yang of the soul, the physical portion of your primal spirit. It is hard and tough, and activating it enhances your physical abilities. The physical portion of your primal spirit is usually the easiest to awaken because it is the one you can directly feel and can be increased through training, stimulants, and exercise." Naruto took a breath and continued, "Once you have become aware of your aura or the Yang portion of your spirit, it becomes easier to detect and awaken the Yin portion of your spirit or your semblance. This is because the Yang is physical and the Yin is spiritual. Without the Yang, the Yin has no shape and therefore no form. Without the Yin, the Yang has no direction and therefore it is hollow, with no substance. Accordingly, each semblance is unique to its user because each person's thoughts, experiences and personality are unique to themselves, though genetics usually has a role to play there as well." The illusion in the air split apart. On one side, there was the aura and semblance, on the other, there was Yin and Yang. Now we come to the differences between the two systems. I do not know how Remnant developed, but what it comes down to is the fact that your aura feeds into your semblance. It's a one-way thing. No aura, no semblance. The orb containing the word semblance bled into the orb labeled aura. "In my world, we learned how to mix Yin and Yang together in what we call our core. This creates chakra. The orb labeled Yin mixed with the orb labeled Yang until they forced a circle that was equally black and white, with one splash of black in the white side of the circle and a dot of white in the black side of the circle. I'm oversimplifying this a bit, but in practical terms, chakra passively enhances us over time, but lacks the sheer defensive and physical capability that aura offers on demand, at least not without great effort and training. What you can tank with aura, I can tank even without, after training, and we don't have semblances or unique powers other than what our genetics give us. In return, chakra is more flexible and capable of creating anything we put our mind to. Anyone who has chakra is capable of that." Naruto clapped his hand again, and Yang was startled out of her awe and reverie as the illusion disappeared. "Put simply, I can do things like this." Revolving orbs of flame, water, wind, lightning, earth, dark and light appeared and floated eerily around the nonchalant blonde man. Yang gives form to Yin. He lifted one hand and summoned Crescent Rose to his hand. He gave it a swing and unfolded it. RWBY and Yang's eyes went wide as Crescent Rose's blade glowed a dim green before he casually swung it again and sent out a nearly invisible vacuum wave that sheared off an entire column of trees in a straight line. Yin gives substance to Yang. "I want to do that." RWBY moaned quietly as she listened to the sound of trees thunderously falling over one after the other. "So awesome." He grinned at the girl sitting on his lap as another flick of the wrist refolded the Crescent Rose before he placed it down next to him and one hand went back to automatically gently patting her back. "Don't misunderstand," he smiled gently at the look on Yang's face. "I'm not saying that chakra is superior to your aura and semblance and that you must have it. It's more flexible, yes. But because your aura and semblance are pure yang and yin constructs, they are also more effective and impactful right off the bat because you can use and improve on them instinctually as you understand yourself better over time, whereas you will need much more training with chakra before you can do the things I can do. There's also the problem of reserves. Naruto added, what I did for RWBY and what I plan to do for you as well after I ensured that you would not be hurt or negatively affected is create an artificial core where your aura and semblance will bleed into and mix before it flows to the rest of your body through the chakra pathways I have made. Unlike me who was born with it and regenerates chakra by default, you and RWBY will have to fill this core with your aura and semblance. Which means that if you plan to use both chakra and semblance at the same time, your aura will be drained 3 times as fast compared to if you were just using your semblance. Yang stared at him for a while, is that why you have us doing this? You said yang can be increased by training. You want us to build up enough physical stamina so that we can use both systems without running out of steam mid-fight or something, right? Like the way RWBY fainted when she tried using your clone skill. That one is a little different. The blonde tapped his chin thoughtfully and pondered over how he should explain it before reaching an idea. Alright, let's say I currently have 5,000 units of chakra right now. RWBY has about 300, give or take. Before we got on that plane, I had actually already used some of her chakra previously, so she actually only had about 50 when she tried that skill. Each clone actually needs a set amount of chakra, typically 100. That's why when she tried to use that skill, she fainted. The blonde shrugged, when I was younger and when I first learned that skill, I had roughly 20,000 at the time, so I could make 200 in one go pretty easily. They used to say you needed 50% of your max chakra reserves per clone, but I tested it a bit and thought it was pretty much bullshit. In fact, after I factored in a combination of training, skill, familiarity and various other reasons, I've even gotten the amount of chakra I need per clone down to about 10-50 units, depending on what I need them to do. For sparring or fighting, they'd need to be tougher and faster, so I tend to put about 50 units in. But for simpler brainless tasks like gathering material or passing messages, 10 is more than enough. Naruto paused for a moment before continuing with a serious mien, that's another difference between RWBY and me at the moment. She is not dependent on chakra and probably never will be. She can run out, fail to use the skill and at worst, it'll just knock her out due to the mental shock from the gap between the amount of chakra she has and the amount she actually needed, but she still has her aura and her semblance. I on the other hand, am a natural chakra user. If I ever run out, I'll straight up just die. If I run out of chakra in this form, I simply poof and go back into the ring and I won't be able to come back out for a while. You'll die. Yang muttered aghast, just like that. Well, it's not really a concern for me at the moment, but technically, yes. Naruto hedged, but if you're worried about fainting, you don't really have to actively use techniques. You can just have it there to increase the potency of your aura alone. Or you could just have it flowing through you and take advantage of the passive increase in growth it offers you. Naruto pointed out, again, I'm not advocating anything. I will explain things as I understand it. What you choose is up to you. But you said you never told RWBY you were doing it until recently. Yang squinted at him suspiciously. That is correct. Naruto admitted frankly with a weak smile, I was being selfish, although I was fairly sure that RWBY would like it. As long as I learn how to cut stuff like that, I'm happy. RWBY piped up. Naruto laughed and tousled her hair, then happy birthday, kid. RWBY blinked and scrambled for her scroll. The date reflected in the dim light told her that she had completely forgotten about her own birthday in the ruckus. Her teeth gleamed white in the firelight before she hurled herself at her sister for a huge before she let go and gave her teacher for a tight hug too. Her dad, her uncle and her team weren't here, but she still had these two. The blonde man looked at the currently blue-haired Yang in the clearing with the lilac eyes as he patted RWBY's back, don't rush to answer, Yang. Take your time and think on it. Even if you decide not to get chakra, I will still train you to the best of my ability. He said as honestly as he could. He waited for Yang to slowly nod before he smiled faintly, alright then, time for a quick spar before we sleep. We just got cleaned up. RWBY pointed out. Then we can clean up again afterwards. It's my birthday. Naruto eyed the small girl critically, but she just fluttered her eyelashes at him innocently before he eventually relented, fine. Starting tomorrow, we'll train after we're done walking for the day and before we clean up. And don't forget to call your dad before you sleep. He added before disappearing back into the ring. Play the climb melee Cyrus. RWBY calmly picked up the ring and placed it in one of her pajamas pockets before she inched closer to Yang with a little worried expression, you okay, Yang? I'm alright sis, Yang let out a heavy breath, just a bit overwhelmed by it all. RWBY cuddled into her sister's side like a limpet, it's okay Yang, I'm fine. You don't have to be so worried for me. The blue-haired girl with the lilac eyes snorted, I was so worried about you that I barely even had time to get worried about my arm. Hell, you barely even know what that guy wants to do with us. Somehow, I feel like I have to be the voice of logic that's reining you in instead of Weiss, and boy am I glad we're going for her first. RWBY stared at her older sister for a moment before she placed her head on Yang's shoulder. You won't lose me, Yang. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. Yang was quiet for a while, and when she spoke it was with a quiet wobble. You almost died, RWBY. No, you did die. Twice. I thought I was going to lose you like I lost Mom. You were going to make it a record too. Dying before we even graduated. She murmured with a downcast smile, at least Mom graduated. It won't happen again. You don't. It won't. RWBY cut her sister off firmly, determination gleaming in her eyes. That's why I'm doing this. So, I can go even further than last time without sacrificing myself. So, I don't have to watch people die helplessly. Yang exhaled again. Promise me. Promise. RWBY offered her sister her pinky with a bright smile. Yang looked at her for a moment before sighing. She could never fight her baby sister whenever she gave her that look with those big silver eyes. I'll hold you to it. Yang hooked RWBY's pinky with her own, and they shook. You have to promise me too. At least listen to sensei. You don't have to get chakra, but at least try and see if he's teaching you something good. Yang snorted again with some resignation. Alright. Alright, stop bugging me already. It's only been 4 days, but don't you think we're already stronger than 1 month we spent in Beacon? To be fair, we spent most of our time in Beacon studying. Yang grunted, we only physically trained like, what, 1 or 2 hours a day. Not only that, all we're doing is walking from sunup to sundown. Any idiot can do that. And he hasn't really taught us anything yet. He will tomorrow. Just at least listen to him, alright? Get some sleep, RWBY. We still have a mountain to climb tomorrow. RWBY smiled happily and shuffled off to her tent, leaving Yang to sit there for a moment, staring at the burning embers in the slowly dying fire. She threw a stick into the embers before finally going to bed. Above them, a clone that had been keeping watch for any grim or enemies in the shadows of the tree, closed his eyes. The next morning, the 3 of them had breakfast quietly and packed up. If Naruto noticed the strange atmosphere, he said nothing about it before they started moving again. The day was broken by sparse breaks every other hour or so, and then lunch before they continued trudging. Eventually, the sun started going down again, and the time that RWBY had been giddily waiting for arrived. 1 clone started preparing the tents and dinner, while 2 more went with RWBY and Yang respectively. With RWBY, the clone set out a scroll, like parchment scroll, with pictures of all the hand signs. Alright, as planned, we're going to practice with hand signs. You need to have those down before anything else. RWBY blinked slowly before one hand went up. What happened to teaching me techniques? Can you do any hand sign on demand? And do them so fast that no one else can see it? The blonde returned wryly. No. Then you better start there. But I already know how to do them. She looked at the chart before amending herself, some of them. Naruto wanted to roll his eyes. What was that she was saying last night about at least listening to him first before making a judgment? Why did that seem like nothing more than a sweet dream right now? You can barely even do one properly, kid. Yes, I can. RWBY pouted at him, I even got that illusion to work. Getting that illusion to work and getting it to work in combat are 2 very different things. Naruto commented dryly. But it's boring. RWBY started pouting harder. Can't we at least practice that illusion first until I get it down properly? It's a C-rank illusion, RWBY. Naruto pointed out patiently, it's not really considered high-end, but I really doubt you've got enough in the tank to do it more than 3 times in a row. Just let me show you, please. RWBY cranked her pout up to 11. Naruto folded like a wet towel. Alright, go ahead. RWBY happily, slowly and clumsily, made the required hand signs before she touched a tree, prompting it to turn invisible. Naruto blinked. He recognized the technique and the application. It was what he had done back in Beacon after all. The problem here was that the false surrounding technique was not supposed to work like that. Rather, it worked by covering a fine layer of chakra over the targeted surface. New users generally wouldn't be able to change much, for example they could make it look like the wall was dirty instead of clean. But they couldn't remove or turn the wall completely transparent without much practice and effort. The bigger the difference between the surface being covered and what was being showed on the surface, the easier it was to detect the illusion or genjutsu, and that kind of change was a bit too drastic for a newbie. Not to mention, it was an environmental illusion, and those usually cost at least 1 level more chakra than a targeted illusion of the same rank. He touched the tree trunk and noted that it was still there. His own skills and nature let him actually see the layer of chakra, so the illusion didn't really have any effect on him, but he could tell that the layer of chakra on the tree trunk was so fine that the average experienced jounin wouldn't have detected it at all. For all intents and purposes, the tree trunk would have turned invisible to them. Then he slowly walked behind the tree trunk and noted that it was still visible and blocking his side of RWBY. He walked a full circle back to his original position. This is I don't get. This shouldn't be possible, Naruto murmured to himself in confusion. RWBY had essentially skipped the first and second step in one go and went straight to at least Jounin level user. It took me years for me to do something like this. You'd need impossibly fine chakra control, incredible focus and a vivid imagination. He slowly turned to look at RWBY. Her chakra reserves were still tiny, probably about as much as Sakura had when she graduated as a genin, so her control was probably as fine as it was going to get right now. And to be fair, it took him that long because his own control was basically a steaming pile of shit and didn't really improve until later on. As for the incredible focus and the vivid imagination. Didn't that basically describe his spacey little girl to a T? When she wasn't being spacey at least. RWBY preened happily and Naruto finally realized that she had just been wanting to show off to him. Naruto sighed and patted her head, alright, you win. Keep training until you're at least fast enough to do the tiger, boar, ox and horse hand signs on demand and I'll teach you another illusion tomorrow. RWBY cheered happily. Naruto just smiled wearily. Like teacher, like student, he supposed. His own transformation illusions were a bit different from the norm too. He just hoped he didn't suck too badly as a teacher because now that he thought about it, he realized that he had never actually trained someone before and Konohamaru didn't count. Oddly enough, training with Yang was actually far smoother than training with RWBY. Smoother as in, she was at least listening and trying to understand what he was saying, but she just didn't get it. He figured it would take some time. What do you wish to learn from me? The blue-eyed blonde asked the lilac-eyed brunette as they stood apart from each other in a small clearing. He felt like it was probably a bad idea to start by explaining fighting styles and methods or by teaching her an entirely new method, not when they already had their own burgeoning styles and habits. Besides, outside of a few specific examples, shinobi rarely specialized in any fighting style or methods. All those were simply just another tool to be used to reach their ultimate goal, but he felt like his relationship with Yang simply wasn't at a point where she would listen to him rattle on about that yet. Yang quirked an eyebrow at him, aren't you supposed to be the teacher here? You tell me. The blonde man nodded, honestly, both you and RWBY are already very good fighters. You have the reflexes and skill to manage both grim and human opponents. Mostly, I think you both lack experience and flexibility, but that will come in time. So let's give it a whirl and see if I can't help you do better. Yang nodded slowly and tensed. When she noted that the other blonde wasn't going to move first, she immediately charged. Her first punch was immediately defused with a simple block, so she whipped around using the momentum from being blocked and lashed out with a roundhouse kick that was again blocked with the other blonde's shoulder, whereupon one arm wrapped around her ankle. Yang growled and pushed herself into a handstand and kicked the taller man with her free leg again and again and again, but the blonde merely tilted his upper body to evade them. Trying another tack, she inhaled and used Naruto's grip on her leg to pivot, intending on sweeping his feet out from under him. When her heel hit his calf, it almost jarred her as the tall man firmly met her attack, strength to strength. His free hand rose and came whooshing down. Almost on instinct, Yang's hair lit up in muted golden flames through the blue dye and her eyes burned red. Naruto's overhead strike immediately flowed into a grab instead. A large and calloused hand wrapped around her wrist before she was suddenly thrown into the air. Gasping at the sudden change in height, she instinctively orientated herself and growled again, a plan forming in her mind. Although she had not absorbed much kinetic energy from their few moves because Naruto hadn't struck her at all, it was still enough to enhance a blow, especially if she used gravity against him. Yang came hurtling down like a golden rocket with a fist outstretched. The other blonde punched back, or at least he had looked like it, until the punch suddenly turned into a knife hand and wrapped around her wrist like a silk rope before redirecting her punch to the side. She hit nothing but ground, and the earth itself trembled and cracked. She chanced to glance back at the other blonde, only to see him just standing there, his legs shifting with the earth, and his center of gravity was completely unaffected, while her back was completely open and her semblance was down. The 17-year-old girl braced herself for the inevitable attack, but nothing came until the tall man patted her back, sit down for a bit. He sat down next to her with his legs folded, ignoring the shattered earth around them. Yang wearily followed suit, so. Crystal blue eyes observed her for a bit before he nodded, you have a lot of anger in you. You feel like the world has done nothing but hit you down your entire life and you want nothing more than to hit back. So you prefer to charge in full bore and bank everything on your strongest punch. It was to the point where if she ever got chakra, he already had a pretty good idea what her elemental affinity was going to be. Yang bristled until the other blonde put up a hand, palms open in the universal sign for peace, I'm not going to ask why or ask you to hide it. Nothing like that. Instead, would you be okay if we tried something else instead? What is it? Naruto helped the brunette up and moved so that he was facing her before he entered a steady stance, just follow exactly what I do. Once he was satisfied the blonde in front of him was ready, he performed a very basic punch. The only difference was in how slow he was moving. Yang quirked one eyebrow and snorted, "You want me to do that? Move as slow as I can." Naruto just patiently nodded, "You can already move very fast. Now we see if you can move slowly." Yang rolled her eyes before mimicking him, grumbling under her breath the entire time, "Like that. Slower." The two of them moved in a pattern, slow fast, then one step. Slow fast step. Slow fast step. They continued like that for an entire hour when Naruto realized that Yang's temper was at its breaking point, upon which he ended the training session, leaving the disgruntled girl to go and clean up. An entire week passed just like that. Ultimately, their schedules didn't deviate much. They climbed through the forests, skirting around Vale in the day, while one of Naruto's clones continued cataloging nearly everything it came across, and then when sun set, they would set camp. RWBY would mix up sparring and her chakra training on alternate days, while Yang would furiously spar with a blonde who would switch styles every round. He didn't often repeat styles either, the sheer width and breadth of fighting styles and methods he seemed to know and could use proficiently boggled Yang's mind. That was the only thing that stopped her from erupting on Naruto when went on to do one of those slow fast meditation type movements together before they bathed and slept. It almost felt more like he was teaching her the steps to a dance rather than training of some kind. That said, and she wouldn't admit this to anyone, not even her sister, she was beginning to find it peaceful, even if she didn't know the reason for it. She felt like she was beginning to drift off into some sort of halfway border between sleep and wakefulness while she followed and listened to the blonde's slow and rhythmic words. And then she'd wake up refreshed and ready for another round of sparring. It was on the 11th evening of their trip when they finally crested the last mountain and arrived at the vast plains north of Vale. In the distance, they could see the lights of a town that neither of them really knew the name of. RWBY threw up her hands and cheered, "We're finally out." Beside her, Yang chuckled a little wearily, "It's almost dark. We should set camp first before we cross the plains tomorrow." The blonde, neither of them knew whether it was a clone or the original, emerged from the tree lines behind them and squinted over the plains. "We're a little late because of the mountains, but we should be able to make up for it across the plain to the northernmost port city, Silmeria, and then it's just half a day's flight to Atlas. We should be in time for that concert. Worst case scenario, I'll just carry both of you and run." Yang's sweat dropped at the idea of her piggybacking on the other blonde and then RWBY piggybacking on her as they hopped across the plains. "Yeah. Not happening." The other blonde smiled good-naturedly at her, "Then you better run fast tomorrow." "Hey, is that smoke?" RWBY muttered as she stared into the distance. Naruto frowned as he refocused on the speck of lights far north of them, "Bandits and Grim." He said after a moment's observation, "The bandits are attacking from the east. About 11 of them. I see someone stopping them from entering the city." He blinked slowly, "I think it's one of Purah's team members. The pink guy. Purah and the others on her team with 4 other hunters are on the west side of town, fighting off the Grim. It's the bunny girls team. Team CFVY." RWBY nodded. "I'm more curious about how you can see that far." Yang muttered as she strained and squinted to even see tiny flecks of black moving shapes dotting the entrances to the town, while smoke rose from the town itself. "Practice and healthy food." The blonde replied blandly as the 3 of them jumped down from the cliff and began speeding off towards the town. "You two take the Grim. I'll deal with the bandits." "Sensei, I can take those." Naruto glanced at the dark-haired girl, "Are you sure?" The implication that she would be fighting men and other desperate people that probably hadn't even awakened their aura yet went unsaid. RWBY just nodded resolutely, "Yeah." "Yang, you good with the Grim?" "Better than good." Yang punched her gauntlets together happily. "Alright. I'll watch your backs. Go. Whichever one finishes first, go help the other." But the bandits, Lai Ren had just finished dispatching one bandit with a quick stab between the eyes. Any queasiness he felt at the blood splashing on his hand was crushed by his semblance, tranquility, only for 3 more to rush him when they were all blown away by a green-haired cat Franus with a familiar-looking scythe attached to her back crashing in from the sky. Lai Ren's eyes bugged out. He had no idea where the Franus had come from, and he had been especially careful to continuously scan the area around him and make sure that none of the bandits would flank him, make it into city to loot and plunder whatever supplies they could get before the Grim destroyed everything, thereby making it even harder for Team CFVY and Team JNPR to defend the city. The green-haired Franus waved at him cheerfully before turning around and exploding into a shower of red rose petals. He knew that semblance. And then the shower of rose petals spun wildly and seemed to multiply and turned into a verifiable blizzard of rose petals. Okay. He didn't know the semblance. Ninjutsu. Hanabura Nijireru. Illusion. Flower petal escape. The name of the technique included the word escape. What RWBY was doing had nothing to do with that word. She was rampaging through the bandits with wild abandon and glee, free to go anywhere any way she liked, and none of them could so much as even see her as she swung her scythe and hamstring them with precision slashes. It didn't even take a minute before all 10 bandits were groaning and screaming on the ground. She turned around and grinned at Lyran, who was still staring at her with wide eyes. Oops. She had forgotten she was still in disguise. RWBY burst into a shower of petals again and darted back into the shadows, much to Lyran's confusion. In the shadows above them, Naruto just watched. One thing he had realized in the past few days was the fact that RWBY was frighteningly talented with illusions. They bent to her will like clay in a potter's hand. It made him feel both complicated and proud. Complicated because he wasn't really a Genjutsu specialist and therefore had a very limited arsenal of illusions, but proud because RWBY was RWBY. On the opposite side of the city, the remaining members of Team JNPR and Team CFVY were in much of the same confusion as a random blue-haired Frona suddenly appeared out of nowhere and began punching Grim like they owed her money. And that was before another Fronis, this one with green hair, swinging a familiar-looking scythe, joined the first one. Still, they weren't complaining. It felt good to fight Grim again, Yang used to herself as she vented every bit of frustration and anger she had in her body. No Grim ever went near their camps, and Yang wasn't sure why, but she was pretty sure it had something to do with the Uzumaki. Beside her, her sister burst into another blizzard of petals, blew her way through an entire column of Grim, leaving behind deep gouges and scratches on ground and Grim alike, while she grabbed one of the larger Grims and used it like a bludgeon. Her muscles bulged as she smashed it into its brethren before she dropped it and ducked a claw that was promptly pierced by a javelin. She waved her thanks to Purah before continuing her rampage. Thanks to their combined teamwork, it didn't take long before the Grim Horde was completely routed. By then Team CFVY and JNPR, minus Lyran, had already crowded around the two Fronisses with wide eyes. Even if they looked completely different from normal, what with the cat ears and the simple hardy clothes they were wearing, it was difficult to completely hide their fighting styles, weapons and semblances. RWBY. Yang. Is that you? The two girls in the disguises shared a look before they both pulled off their respective cat ear headbands. Yep. Yang said plainly. Not that I don't appreciate the help, but what the hell are you two doing here? And what happened to your hair? Coco Adele mourned comically, your beautiful, beautiful hair. Why don't we go inside first before we talk? John cut in with a suggestion. Buoyed by the mood of meeting their friends again, Yang and RWBY instantly agreed. As it turned out, Team CFVY had been sent to this town about a month ago, even before RWBY had woken up in the hospital, so they had had no idea about RWBY and the second attack on Beacon or what happened to her after that. After the attack on Beacon had been routed, all the Grim that had nowhere to go had instead turned on the next largest target in the vicinity, and that target had been the large farming town on the outskirts of Northern Vale that supplied Vale with most of its produce. Team JNPR had only been sent to reinforce them less than 2 weeks ago, shortly after RWBY had left Beacon. The last team of RWBY's generation was still in Beacon. As John explained it, Team CRDL had originally the team slated to reinforce Team CFVY 1 week after they arrived, but Carden Winchester's father, a member of Vale's ruling council, had refused to let him out of the city. Then again, Carden didn't seem to be complaining very hard, nor had he or his team been seen doing anything to help the reconstruction like Team JNPR had, and so after Winchester the senior and Professor Osborne had argued back and forth, Team JNPR had been sent 1 week late and Team CFVY had been forced to defend the town by themselves, plus any volunteers, for 2 weeks. Luckily, the only danger the Grim here presented were in their larger than usual numbers and the bandits that were always making an attempt to steal supplies. There were several other second and third year teams working on a rotation to guard the other settlements around Vale and Vale itself, but those were further away and thus more dangerous since any reinforcements were a long way off, nor did Coco know anything about them. Once they had and met up with Lyran on the way to the large residential building that was being used as accommodation for Team CFVY and Team JNPR and taken a seat in the large living room. The building was old but serviceable, and the living room had 3 sets of couches ringing a fireplace, with RWBY and Yang taking the middle one, Team CFVY on the left, and Team JNPR on the right. Eventually, it was RWBY and Yang's turn to explain what they had been doing the past 2 weeks or so, minus any mentions of chakra. Wait, so the two of you have been training with the woman that stopped the attack? Was she a relative of yours? She looked a lot like Yang. Coco looked sincerely impressed. RWBY wasn't quite sure how to explain this, Team JNPR already more or less knew, so that left Team CFVY as the only ones here who didn't know about a ring. In addition, although they hadn't seen Sensei personally during the attack, they had most definitely seen the videos. Actually it's a guy. Nora blinked, so your uncle's a cross-dresser. she concluded innocently. Coco just nodded sagely, don't worry, I got nothing against that. Everyone's got their preferences. Right guys? As everyone murmured their agreements, Yang straight up exploded into peals of laughter, while Ruby stifled a giggle, well let's just say that there was a reason he looked like that day. Normally he just dresses like any other normal guy. Okay. Coco accepted the explanation despite the quirked eyebrow at Ruby and Yang, so? Where's our hero of Beacon? He was supposed to be watching out for our backs. Ruby commented with some shame, she had totally forgot about her sensei in the excitement of meeting her friends again, I'll go call him. No need. I'm here. Everyone in the room jumped so high they practically hit the roof. And once they were back on the ground, all their weapons came out like a bristling porcupine out at the man who had apparently been sitting in the middle of Team JNPR, wedged in between John and Lyran, without being noticed at all. Not a single one of them had seen the fucker come in or sit down, not even Ruby or Yang. As all of them were busy trying to understand how that had happened, Naruto smirked at them, hello everyone. It's good to finally meet all of you face to face. I've heard a lot about you from Ruby and Yang. Coco observed the blonde man that looked to be roughly in his late 20s that only emphasized his simple vest, shirt and slacks combo. He had an odd set scaring on his face, set against a tough and angular face, that made him look like a faunus with whiskers and gave him a rugged sort look, the sort you would normally see on daywork laborers, at odds against the neat and soft feeling she got from his clothing style. In short, he looked nothing like Ruby or Yang, though that wasn't really anything important in Remnant nowadays, and he looked like someone who spent all his day in the office. So, you're pretty strong right? Coco said challengingly. I suppose I am. The blonde man replied blandly. Alright, let's see what you got. Gotta make sure my juniors are being taken care after all. The boisterous girl in the fashionable clothes laughed loudly as she swung her handbag around. Velvet tugged her sleeve fiercely, Coco. We were in town, you can't use Jinduja here. She whispered urgently. Team JNPR nodded along, besides, isn't it late already? Can't we do this tomorrow? John pleaded. No can do, Lady Killer. Yang spoke up, we got a schedule to keep, so we're going to be hitting the road as soon as the sun rises. Naruto tilted his head. More specifically, he seemed to be considering Yang, who narrowed her eyes at him in return, before he nodded to Coco, tell you what. No weapons. In return, you and your whole team can fight me at once. Coco whistled, now that's confidence. Alright. You're on. First one to red or loses. The blonde man bowed, as you wish. Yatsuhashi and Fox approached Coco with troubled expressions, are you sure about this, Coco? You already know he's strong as hell. I couldn't sense him at all. Fox agreed. He was blind, so he relied mostly on his hearing and his semblance to detect people around him, but not even he had noticed anything wrong until the blonde had spoken up himself. I know he's strong. Coco replied confidently, Ruby and Yang's uncle over there kicked the ass of almost every Grim in Beacon in one go. I wanna see just how far we have to go before we reach that kind of level. Once everyone was ready and Yang was refereeing, she looked at both sides, ready. Once she had gotten affirmatives from Team CFVY and seeing the placid expression on Naruto's face, she shot an empty blank from Ember Celica, go. As usual, Naruto never initiated, he simply stood there and waited for his opponents to come to him. He leaned away from Yatsuhashi's quick jab before taking an odd step forward to avoid Fox's leg sweep. Then when Coco tried to capitalize on his shaky stance with a quick rush, he simply lifted that one foot, somehow staying steady with just one foot on the ground despite the odd angle he was standing at, and kicked Coco's leg gently, knocking her entire form astray. Slowly, one hand rotated to deal with Yatsuhashi's heavy punches, meeting strength with softness, while another darted like a snake, disrupting Fox before he could even attack. Meanwhile, he took heavy and light steps, moving the center of the battlefield forward even as he dealt with Coco with a single leg, with that strange slow but fast footwork, essentially dribbling the confused girl across the floor. Yang watched with fascination. There was something about what he was doing that felt really familiar. Like a slowly rolling, grinding boulder. Slow fast step. Slow fast step. She wasn't sure if it was because she had just vented all her anger on the Grim earlier, or the euphoria of meeting her friends again after 2 extremely tiring and frustrating weeks, or if it was because she was finally looking at it from another person's perspective, but something inside her suddenly shifted. Once Naruto had moved far enough, he kicked Coco lightly so that she fell back on Velvet before grasping Yatsuhashi and Fox's wrists. With a pivot, he sent them both flying into the air before he disabled Coco's kick and sent her up to join her other teammates. He kept one eye on Velvet who stood there, paling and uncertain. Each time one of Team CFVY came down, he would grasp their limbs and spin, sending them back up. He was juggling them, the others realized with a start. It started slow, but slowly got faster and faster until bam. He had let Coco, Yatsuhashi and Fox fall, but before they hit the ground, he had gently kicked them, sending them flying over to Velvet one by one until they hit the ground and sprawled at her feet. Velvet looked up as he lifted one hand and clenched her eyes shut as the hand came down, fully expecting the man to swat her down to the ground like he had done to her teammates. Instead, she felt the man's hand land on her head, gently patting her. "You need a bit more confidence, Miss Carlotina. You can't always depend on your friend to let you know when to move." Her big soulful brown eyes slowly opened warily before they closed again and she was unconsciously humming to herself. The man's hand was really comfortable and gentle and he rubbed her ears just nice. "Boy. Stop molesting my girlfriend, old man." Coco angrily yelled as she clambered to her feet. "Old man." Naruto was rather miffed at that. He didn't actually know how long he had been sealed, but he personally still felt like he was only in his mid-20s. Even if you added the 10 years he had spent with RWBY, that technically still made him only 35 minus a few years here and there because he spent most of that sleeping and that wasn't old at all. Okay. Alright, all of you brats, come at me." He grunted as he stepped away from Velvet and shrugged off his vest and shirt in one go and then dropped into a ready stance, feet spread wide stably and one arm open palmed in front of him while the other guarded his chest. "I'm gonna spank all of you for real this time." Only no one moved, much to the blonde man's confusion until. "Almighty, you can grind rocks on those." Coco murmured softly. She heard Velvet squeaking in agreement. Even Purr and Nora, the two ladies who were already spoken for, although she wasn't 100% sure about Nora, shifted slightly. RWBY started rolling around in giggles while Yang just rolled her lilac eyes. Everyone there was no stranger to well-built men considering they were all hunters and huntresses. In fact, it was probably easier to find muscled and well-toned man than a flabby, soft one in Beacon. However, thanks to aura boosting their physical capabilities, most of them didn't go the same extremes as the blonde apparently had either. The fact that the blonde's choice of baggy and covering clothes tended to make him look a little soft and homely didn't help, but the moment he had shrugged them off, everyone there saw corded, bulging, gleaming muscles that rippled as he moved. There was no fat whatsoever on that lean swimmer's frame, and the tall man somehow looked even larger than he was normally and made them feel like he towered way above them. Why isn't anyone moving? Training is postponed," Coco proclaimed, her tone a little higher than normal before she grabbed Velvet and ran for it. Naruto blinked slowly. "What's going on?" Someone tapped his shoulder and he looked back to see Yang offering him his shirt and vest, a huge smirk on her face. "Training's over, big guy. Pack it up before someone tries to jump you." "Isn't that the point of this training? For them to get the jump on me?" Yang rolled her eyes and threw his clothes at his dumb face. Save me from this idiot." What if Naruto sealed away an RWBY end here and thanks for watching my video till the end.